There is a woman at the start of everything. And they removed her name. They cut it from the Greek translations. They omitted it from the Latin editions. They buried it beneath centuries of silence so deep that most people living today have never once heard it spoken aloud. But they could not erase it entirely. Because somewhere in the highlands of Ethiopia, in monasteries carved into cliffs that no empire ever fully conquered, in manuscripts written in a language older than the Bible you grew up reading, her name survived. It survived. Quit waiting. Tonight, you are going to hear it. Not one account, not two. 3 separate ancient accounts.
Lord,
each
have
preserved in the
mercy
Ethiopian
upon
biblical
us.
canon, each drawing from
Christ, have
sources
mercy.
that predate the oldest manuscripts held in Western churches, each giving a different answer to the question that has haunted Genesis since the first reader reached chapter 4 and stopped confused and asked, "Where did Cain's wife come from?" This is not a bedtime story. What you are about to hear is older than bedtime stories. It is older than the tradition of reading before sleep, older than the habit of asking questions in the dark. These accounts were written down by monks who believed that getting this question wrong was not merely an academic error. It was a spiritual one. That the woman beside Cain at the founding of the world's first city was not an afterthought. That she had a name. That her origin mattered. That God Himself had something to say about how she came to stand beside the man who bore the first mark. So close your eyes now. Let the world outside grow
Lord,
quiet.
have mercy
Let the
upon
sounds of your
us.
day, all of it, every
Christ,
obligation,
have
every unfinished
mercy.
thing, let it fade like smoke in an open field. Tonight you will hear what the Ethiopian Bible preserved. Tonight you will walk the path that Genesis left unspoken. Tonight, in the stillness that is already beginning to settle over you, you will hear her name. Before we walk into the story itself, you deserve to know why you can trust what you are about to hear, because the moment someone mentions the Ethiopian Bible, a certain kind of skepticism rises. Western Christianity spent centuries constructing a canon, deciding which texts belonged, which were dangerous, which were to be locked away or quietly destroyed. And in that process of construction, a great deal was lost. Or rather, a great deal was made to seem lost. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church never accepted those boundaries. While the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD
Lord,
was
have
still
mercy
debating which
upon
letters and
us.
Gospels would
Christ,
be permitted
have
inside
mercy.
the emerging Western canon, the Ethiopian Church had already been Christian for nearly a century and had preserved a substantially wider collection of sacred texts as authoritative scripture. The Ethiopian Bible contains 81 books. The Protestant Bible contains 66. The difference between those two numbers is not a footnote. It is a world. The first credibility bomb in 1947, a Bedouin shepherd stumbled into a cave near the northwestern shore of the Dead Sea in a place called Qumran. What he found inside, wrapped in linen, sealed in clay jars, hidden from the Roman legions that destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD, were the oldest surviving biblical manuscripts ever recovered. Among them, scholars discovered multiple copies of the Book of Jubilees. Not fragments, multiple copies. Jubilees was not fringe material hidden by a
Lord,
single eccentric
have
sect.
mercy
It was
upon
central enough
us.
to copy, preserve,
Christ,
and protect
have
at the cost of
mercy.
one's life. And Jubilees, that same text found in those desert caves, has been continuous, uninterrupted scripture in the Ethiopian Orthodox canon for over 1600 years. Jubilees is where the first account of Cain's wife lives. The second credibility bomb in the 15th century. A Scottish explorer named James Bruce traveled deep into the Ethiopian highlands. A journey so dangerous that several members of his party did not survive it, and returned to Europe carrying 3 complete manuscripts of the Book of 1 Enoch. The scholarly establishment in Edinburgh mocked him. They called the texts fabrications. They said no such book could exist. Then, decades later, when additional Enoch fragments surfaced among the Dead Sea Scrolls, Bruce was vindicated entirely. What the Ethiopian Church had quietly preserved
Lord,
in
have
mountain
mercy
monasteries,
upon
Western
us.
scholarship had dismissed as
Christ,
fiction
have mercy.
until the desert sand offered the same proof. The Cave of Treasures tells us something else entirely about Cain's wife. Something more intimate, more ancient, more specific about her origin than either Jubilees or Enoch dares to be. The third credibility bomb. The Ge'ez language, the liturgical tongue of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, is one of the oldest continuously used written languages on earth. It is not a translation language. It did not receive its sacred texts filtered through Greek, then Latin, then early modern English. Ge'ez manuscripts of Jubilees, the Cave of Treasures, and related apocryphal material carry textual variants that simply do not appear in any Western tradition. Scholars at Oxford, at the University of Hamburg, at Addis Ababa University, have spent careers documenting these divergences. The names, the genealogies, the specific
Lord,
legal
have
frameworks
mercy
governing early
upon
human
us.
marriage.
Christ,
Details
have
absent from
mercy.
Genesis, absent from the Septuagint, absent from Jerome's Vulgate, appear in Ge'ez manuscripts with a specificity that suggests not invention, but preservation. Someone was keeping records. Someone believed these details mattered enough to copy them by hand, generation after generation, in fire-lit rooms at altitude, surrounded by centuries of silence and thin mountain air. Tonight you will enter those records. Tonight you will meet the 3 accounts side by side. The legal account from Jubilees, the genealogical account from the Cave of Treasures, and the third, older, stranger account, carried in the oral traditions surrounding the Ethiopian synaxarium. We will walk with the first family in the hours after Abel's blood darkened the earth. We will witness what the shortened Genesis narrative skips entirely. We will understand, perhaps for
Lord,
the first
have mercy
time, why her
upon
name was
us.
removed from Western translations,
Christ, have mercy.
and what her survival in Ethiopian scripture tells us about the nature of preservation itself. Settle deeper now. Release the weight of your shoulders. Let your breath arrive slowly, like a tide returning to a shore it has always known. The oldest story is about to speak again. There are silences in Scripture that are louder than anything written around them. Genesis 4 is full of them. Adam knew his wife Eve, and she conceived and bore Cain, then Abel. Then, in the space of a single verse, Abel is dead in a field, and Cain is standing over him with soil on his hands and something irreversible behind his eyes. God speaks. Cain answers. The mark is placed. And then, 4 verses later, Cain goes to the land of Nod, and there he has a wife, just like that, without explanation, without introduction, without a single word about where she came from, who her parents were,
Lord,
what her
have
name was,
mercy upon
or how
us.
she came to be waiting
Christ,
in
have
Nod, as though
mercy.
the story had already arranged her there. Western readers have wrestled with this absence for centuries. Some called it a textual gap, an oversight by the author of Genesis, or evidence of multiple source traditions stitched imperfectly together. Others offered the biological explanation. Cain must have married a sister, and the author simply found the detail too uncomfortable to name. Still others proposed more elaborate solutions. Pre-Adamic races, parallel human creations, populations that existed alongside Adam's line without ever appearing in the text. Each of these explanations carries a particular desperation, the desperation of a tradition that lost something and does not want to admit the loss, because the Ethiopian manuscripts do not treat this as a gap at all. They treat it as a story, a complete one, with names, with dates, with legal
Lord,
frameworks,
have mercy
with the
upon
direct
us.
voice of God, addressing the
Christ,
question
have mercy.
not as an embarrassment, but as a theological cornerstone. The first moment in human history when God established the law of marriage, when he drew the boundaries of what was permitted and what was not. When he looked at the broken family east of Eden and decided that, even in the aftermath of fratricide, covenant was still possible. The silence in Genesis 4 is not an accident. It is a door, and behind that door stands a woman named Awan, or a woman named Luluwa, or a woman whose origin is older and stranger than either name suggests, whose story begins not in Nod at all, but in the same red soil from which Adam was formed, in the same divine breath that animated his lungs, in the same act of creation that the abbreviated Genesis account compresses into a single chapter and moves past without looking back. The 3 accounts disagree on her name. They partially
Lord,
disagree
have
on her
mercy
origin,
upon us.
but they agree on one thing with
Christ,
a
have
unanimity
mercy.
that cannot be coincidental. She was not an accident. She was not an afterthought written in later to resolve a genealogical inconsistency. She was not a woman from an unnamed tribe conveniently located in a region called Nod. She was known. She was placed. Her existence was addressed by God himself in the same conversation, in the same heavenly deliberation. That produced the laws governing Adam's children and their children's children across the generations that would eventually build the world. Here is what the removal of her name accomplished. It did not make the question disappear. Every reader who has ever reached Genesis 4 verse 17 has felt the absence, that small, persistent snagging sensation, like a loose thread in fabric that the eye keeps returning to. The removal of her name did not resolve the tension. It amplified it. It
Lord,
turned a named
have
woman
mercy
with a
upon
documented
us.
origin into a phantom,
Christ,
a
have
figure so
mercy.
undefined that she became a site of projection, of speculation, of theological anxiety that has never fully quieted. The Ethiopian tradition made a different choice. It named her. It situated her. It gave her a father, in some accounts, and in others a twin, a mirror image born alongside Cain himself, bound to him not only by love but by the strange, terrible logic of a world that had not yet filled with enough people to offer any other possibility. And in naming her, it named the question, not as a problem to be solved, as a mystery to be entered, slowly, carefully, the way you enter a room where something sacred once happened, and the air still carries the memory of it. That is where we are going now. Breathe slowly. Let your body grow heavier against whatever holds you. The oldest answer to the oldest question is just ahead, and it has been waiting a very
Lord,
long time
have
for
mercy
someone willing
upon
to be still
us.
enough to hear it.
Christ, have
There comes a moment
mercy.
in every ancient genealogy when the careful reader stops, sets the text down, and simply sits with what they have just encountered. The book of Jubilees delivers that moment in chapter 4, verse 1. And in the 3rd week in the 2nd Jubilee, Cain took Awan his sister to be his wife, and she bore him Enoch at the close of the 4th Jubilee. 9 words into the answer, and the answer is already uncomfortable. His sister, not a stranger from Nod, not a woman from an unnamed population east of the known world, not a figure conjured by theological convenience to patch a genealogical gap. A sister specifically named, specifically placed, specifically identified as the daughter of Adam and Eve, born after Cain, born before the murder, living in the same household where the first grief in human history would eventually shatter everything it touched. Her name was Awan.
Lord, have
In
mercy
Ge'ez,
upon
the
us.
name carries
Christ,
a
have
resonance that does not
mercy.
translate cleanly into English. It suggests something like the one who answers or the responsive one. A name that implies relationship, reciprocity, the act of turning toward another. Whether this etymology was intentional in the original naming or retroactively meaningful in the Ethiopian tradition is a question scholars debate. But the name itself is not disputed. Multiple independent Ge'ez manuscript traditions record it identically. Awan, daughter of Adam, sister of Cain, the woman who stood beside him when the rest of the world was, in the most literal sense possible, only a handful of people. Now sit with the discomfort honestly, because the Ethiopian tradition does not ask you to bypass it. The book of Jubilees is not presenting Cain's marriage to his sister as something wholesome or unremarkable. It is presenting it as something that required
Lord,
divine
have
address,
mercy upon us.
something that God himself had to
Christ,
legislate
have
around,
mercy.
had to build legal frameworks to eventually prohibit once the human population reached sufficient size that the prohibition became both possible and necessary. The angels who dictated Jubilees to Moses on Sinai, according to the text's own framing, were not embarrassed by this detail. They were explaining it. There is a significant difference between those two postures. The explanation goes like this. In the beginning, there was no law against marrying a sister because there was no one else. The first generation of human children born to Adam and Eve had no choice. Not in the sense of moral failure, but in the sense of mathematical reality. A world with only 2 original parents produces only siblings. The law against such unions Jubilees argues, was not violated by the earliest generations because it had not yet been given. It would be written into
Lord,
the
have
heavenly tables,
mercy upon
the divine
us.
legal code that
Christ,
predates Sinai,
have
that
mercy.
predates Moses, that predates the patriarchs. But it would be written for a time when alternatives existed. For Cain and Awan, alternatives did not yet exist. This is not rationalization. This is legal theology of a sophisticated kind, and it matters because it changes who Awan is entirely. She is not a shameful secret. She is not the unnamed figure the Western tradition left in shadow, because her origin was too awkward to acknowledge. She is a woman navigating an impossible situation with the dignity that the Ethiopian text consistently attributes to her. Present, named, bearing children, building a household in Nod, while her husband carried a mark that announced to anyone who might eventually encounter him exactly what he had done. Think about what that cost her. She left the only home she had ever known. She followed a man eastward, away from
Lord,
Eden,
have mercy
away from the
upon us.
grief-hollowed presence of her parents,
Christ,
away
have
from whatever
mercy.
remained of the world she had been born into a land called Nod, which in Hebrew means wandering. She went to the land of wandering, with the man who had made wandering necessary. She did not abandon him. She did not send word back to Adam and Eve that she refused the life ahead of her. She built something, and she bore him Enoch. 4 words. The entire record of Awan's contribution to the continuation of the human story compressed into 4 words. But 4 words that contain an entire world, because Enoch, Cain's son, would lend his name to the first city ever constructed on the face of the earth. Awan's child. The child she carried eastward through a landscape that had never held a human dwelling. The child who would grow up to become the foundation, literally, of urban civilization. She bore him Enoch. She bore him the city. One evening, years
Lord,
into their
have
life in
mercy
Nod,
upon us. Christ,
Cain
have
sat outside
mercy.
whatever shelter they had built and looked at his son playing in the dust and said something that the text does not record, but that the silence around it implies. Awan sat beside him. She did not speak either. There are kinds of grief so old and so thoroughly absorbed into the bones that language becomes unnecessary. She had watched him carry the weight of Abel's absence every day of their eastward life. She had watched the mark on his skin, whatever form it took, and she had chosen daily to remain. That choice is Awan's story, not the biology of her origin, not the legal framework that eventually superseded the necessity that produced her marriage. The choice, the daily, unrecorded, unnamed act of remaining beside a man whom the rest of the human world, all 4 or 5 people of it, had cause to fear and avoid. She remained. And in the Ethiopian tradition, that remaining is not overlooked.
Lord, have
It is the
mercy
reason she
upon
is named.
us.
It is
Christ,
the reason Jubilees
have
records her with
mercy.
the same precision it uses for the patriarchs. Chapter, Jubilee, week, year. She is not a footnote. She is a coordinate in sacred time. Her marriage, her son, her presence in Nod. All of it is recorded with the same chronological care that the angels use to track the movements of heaven. The first account of Cain's wife is not comfortable. It was never meant to be, but it is complete. And in its completeness, In the naming, the dating, the legal contextualizing, the quiet acknowledgement of what it cost her, there is a kind of dignity that the unnamed phantom of Genesis 4 could never possess. Awan existed. She was known. She was there. And what the Book of Jubilees does next, what it builds from her presence into a complete legal architecture governing all human marriage, is where the story grows even larger than one woman's name. There are things
Lord,
written before
have
the world
mercy
needed them.
upon us.
Laws
Christ,
recorded in heaven
have
before the
mercy.
circumstances requiring those laws had yet arrived on earth. Prohibitions carved into divine tablets before the human population had grown large enough for those prohibitions to carry meaning. This is the theological architecture underlying the Book of Jubilees, and it is the framework without which Awan's story and Cain's wife's story in all three of its accounts cannot be properly understood. The heavenly tables are not a metaphor in Jubilees. They are not a poetic device deployed to give divine authority to human legislation. They are presented as a literal celestial document, a pre-existent legal code written by God before Adam drew his first breath, dictated by the angel of the presence to Moses on Sinai, containing within its pages every law that would eventually govern human life on earth. Marriage law, inheritance law, agricultural
Lord,
law,
have
Sabbath
mercy
observance,
upon
festival
us.
calendars,
Christ,
purification
have
rites, all of
mercy.
it pre-written, all of it waiting for the appropriate human moment to activate. This matters enormously, Hindy, for understanding the first account of Cain's wife. Because when Jubilees records that Cain took Awan, his sister, it does so without condemnation. And the reason it does so without condemnation is not moral laxity or theological carelessness. It is legal precision. The prohibition against marrying a sister had not yet descended from the heavenly tables into operative human law. It existed in heaven. It was waiting. But it had not been delivered because the circumstances requiring it had not yet arrived. God does not give laws before their time. This principle, stated explicitly in Jubilees and woven implicitly through the Cave of Treasures and related Ethiopian texts, reframes the entire first generation of human marriages
Lord,
in a way the
have
Western
mercy
tradition simply
upon
does not
us.
preserve.
Christ,
reading,
have mercy.
Cain's marriage is either ignored entirely or treated as a slightly embarrassing biological necessity that polite theology does not examine closely. In the Ethiopian reading, it is a case study in divine legal timing, a demonstration that God's governance of human life is not rigid and mechanical, but responsive, calibrated to the actual conditions of human existence at each successive stage of history. Consider what this means practically. Adam and Eve produced children. Those children in the first generation could only marry each other. There was no other option. The world held exactly the people it held, and those people were siblings. God knew this. He had designed it this way, not as a permanent condition, but as a transitional one, a bridge generation, the necessary arithmetic of a world being populated from a single origin point. The
Lord,
laws that would
have
eventually
mercy
govern sexual
upon
ethics
us.
were already written in heaven,
Christ, have
but heaven held them in
mercy.
reserve, releasing them into human practice only as human society developed the complexity to require them. Jubilees records the precise moment this began to change. In chapter 3, before the account of Awan, the text establishes that Adam and Eve observed a specific purification period after each birth. 40 days for a male child, 80 days for a female. During these periods, Eden itself functioned as a kind of sacred enclosure governed by rules that anticipated the temple regulations Moses would eventually receive on Sinai. The point is not the specific numbers. The point is that even in Eden, human life was already being organized by a legal framework descending from the heavenly tables. The law was always present. It was simply being administered in stages. Awan's marriage to Cain falls within the first stage, a stage
Lord,
characterized
have
by necessity,
mercy upon
governed by
us.
divine tolerance,
Christ,
documented
have
without
mercy.
shame in a text that treats the earliest generations of human beings not as moral failures navigating impossible circumstances, but as participants in a sacred unfolding. A gradual revelation of divine law matched precisely to the gradual development of human civilization. Now here is where the heavenly tables narrative intersects most powerfully with the question of Cain's wife, because Jubilees does not stop at recording Awan's marriage. It goes further. It records that Adam himself, in the years following Cain's exile, received direct instruction from God about the marriages of his remaining children. The text describes Adam being shown, through the same angelic mediation that would later produce the Sinai revelation, the divine plan for the second and third generations, who would marry whom, what the parameters of permitted union would be
Lord,
as the
have
family
mercy
expanded,
upon us.
how the transition
Christ,
from
have
sibling marriage
mercy.
to cousin marriage to marriage between more distantly related individuals would unfold across the Jubilee cycles that Jubilees uses to organize all of human prehistory. This is not mythology improvising genealogical solutions. This is a legal commentary on Genesis presenting marriage law as one of the earliest and most carefully administered aspects of divine governance over human life. The angels watching over this process are identified in Jubilees not as distant celestial observers, but as active participants, recording each marriage in the heavenly tables, marking each child born, tracking the Jubilee cycles with the same meticulous attention that a modern registrar might bring to a record of births and deaths. Heaven was keeping accounts. Every union was noted. Every child was counted. The expansion of the human family from 2 people to a population
Lord,
capable
have
of
mercy
sustaining a
upon
city.
us.
The city
Christ,
Awan's son
have
Enoch
mercy.
would eventually give his name to was not a random biological process unfolding beneath an inattentive heaven. It was administered, watched, recorded, cared for, and Awan was in those records by name, by date, by the specific Jubilee cycle in which her marriage occurred, and the specific week in which her son was born. She was not erased from the heavenly tables the way she was erased from Western translations. In the celestial accounting that Jubilees claims to transcribe, she occupies her precise coordinate. A woman at the founding of the human legal story, present at the moment when marriage itself first required divine definition. Think about what it meant for Eve to watch this. She had lost one son to violence and another to exile. She had watched Cain walk eastward carrying a mark she could not remove and a guilt she could not absorb on his behalf.
Lord,
And then
have
she had
mercy
watched
upon
Awan, her
us.
daughter, a child
Christ,
she had
have
carried and
mercy.
nursed and raised in a world where she herself was still learning what it meant to be a mother. Walk eastward after him, into Nod, into wandering. One morning before Awan left, Eve stood at the edge of whatever dwelling they had built east of Eden and held her daughter's face between her hands. The text does not record what she said. Perhaps she said nothing. Perhaps the holding was the entire language available to her. The grip of a mother's hands on a daughter's face. The attempt to memorize a feature before distance made memory the only access remaining. Awan did not look away. She held her mother's gaze with the steadiness of someone who has already decided and does not need to be persuaded or dissuaded. She was going. Not because she had no choice, or not only because of that, but because the alternative was leaving Cain entirely alone in the land of wandering.
Lord,
And
have
whatever
mercy
he had
upon
done,
us.
he was still her brother.
Christ, have
Still the person she
mercy.
had grown up beside in the only world either of them had ever known. She turned east. Eve watched until the distance made her invisible. The heavenly tables recorded the departure. The angels noted the Jubilee and the week. Somewhere in the celestial archive that Jubilees claims to reproduce, the first marriage in human history outside the boundaries of Eden was entered into the record, complete with names, dates, and the quiet courage of a woman walking toward a life that no precedent had prepared her for. The law that would eventually prohibit what necessity had temporarily permitted was already written above her as she walked. She did not know it was there. She knew only the ground beneath her feet, the figure ahead of her, and the strange, specific weight of being the first woman in history to choose a direction and commit to it fully.
Lord,
She walked
have
into the
mercy
first
upon
marriage.
us.
She walked into the
Christ,
first
have
legal question
mercy.
God would have to answer about human love. She walked into the record that the Ethiopian Bible kept when every other tradition looked away. Her name was Awan, and the heavenly tables knew it. There are griefs that do not announce themselves. They do not arrive with weeping, or with torn garments, or with the loud, undeniable presence of fresh loss. They arrive quietly. They settle into the body like cold settles into stone, slowly, completely without drama. By the time you feel the full weight of them, they have already become part of your architecture. You carry them not as wounds, but as density. As a heaviness in the chest that you have simply stopped noticing because it has been there so long it feels like your original shape. Eve carried this kind of grief. The Ethiopian tradition, particularly the Cave of Treasures and the passages surrounding it
Lord,
in the
have
broader
mercy
manuscript
upon
corpus,
us.
returns
Christ,
to Eve
have
repeatedly in the
mercy.
years following Abel's death and Cain's exile. Not to the dramatic Eve of the garden, the figure of temptation and consequence that Western theology has spent 2 millennia analyzing and assigning blame to. A different Eve entirely, an older one, a woman sitting in the long, unmarked middle of a life that had already contained more firstness than any human being before or since. She was the first mother. She bore the first children. She witnessed the first death. She watched the first exile. She held the first empty place at a family table, that particular hollow that opens in a household when someone who belonged there is simply, permanently no longer present. And through all of it, the Ethiopian texts record something. The Western tradition barely acknowledges Eve was silent about Cain's wife, not ignorant. Silent, this distinction
Lord,
matters enormously.
have mercy upon us.
The Western reading assumes
Christ,
that the absence
have
of information about
mercy.
Cain's wife in Genesis reflects a genuine textual gap. That the author of Genesis did not know, or did not care, or deliberately omitted details that were unavailable. But the Ethiopian framework, particularly as articulated through the Cave of Treasures, suggests something far more psychologically complex. Eve knew exactly who Awan was. She had carried her. She had named her. She had watched her walk eastward into a life that no mother could fully prepare a daughter for. Her silence was not ignorance. It was the silence of a woman who understood that some knowledge is too intimate for public record, that some facts about the people you love most exist in a register beneath language, in the wordless territory of memory and longing where formal documentation cannot reach. She knew Awan's face. She knew the specific way Awan held
Lord,
her shoulders when
have
she was
mercy
uncertain.
upon us.
The particular quality
Christ,
of her daughter's
have
laughter
mercy.
in the early morning before the day's work began. She knew things about Cain's wife that no manuscript could contain, and so she did not speak them into the record. The Cave of Treasures captures Eve in a scene that the compressed Genesis narrative has no space for. A scene set years after Cain's departure, in the dwelling that Adam had built on the slopes below the garden's sealed entrance. Adam is present but diminished. The text describes him as a man whose body still carries the faint luminosity of Eden. That quality of light that both he and Eve possessed before the expulsion, now fading slowly with each year outside the garden's atmosphere, like a lamp whose oil is gradually consumed. He is still recognizably himself. But the brightness is going. Eve sits near him. She is doing something with her hands. The Cave of Treasures does not specify what,
Lord,
but
have mercy
the posture
upon
the text
us.
describes suggests
Christ,
the kind
have
of repetitive
mercy.
physical task that allows the mind to travel elsewhere while the body remains anchored. Weaving, perhaps, or grinding. Something rhythmic, something that keeps the hands occupied while the heart does its quieter, less manageable work. She is thinking about Awan. The text does not state this directly. It states it obliquely, in the way that ancient literature often carries its most precise emotional observations. Through implication, through the accumulation of detail around a central absence, through what is not said as much as what is. The Cave of Treasures records Eve asking Adam, in this scene, a question about the direction of the east wind. Whether it carries anything toward them, whether it brings news of what lies beyond their sight. Adam looks at her. He does not answer immediately. Then he says, "The east is very far, Eve." And she says, "I know
Lord,
how far it is."
have mercy
That exchange,
upon us.
4 words.
Christ,
then 5
have
contains
mercy.
the entire geography of parental grief, the knowledge of distance, the acknowledgement that knowing the distance does not make it smaller, the shared understanding between two people who have already said everything expressible and are now living in the territory beyond expression. This is Eve's silence about Cain's wife. It is not the silence of omission. It is not the silence of shame. Though Western interpreters have often tried to read shame into it, the suggestion that Eve could not speak Awan's name aloud because the circumstances of her daughter's marriage were too irregular, too uncomfortable, too biologically fraught to acknowledge in polite theological discourse. The Ethiopian tradition refuses this reading entirely. Eve's silence was the silence of a mother who loved her daughter too, specifically for the record to hold. There is something else.
Lord,
The cave
have
of
mercy
treasures
upon
preserves in this
us.
period
Christ,
of Eve's life
have
that
mercy.
connects directly to the question of Cain's wife. A detail so specific that it feels less like theological invention and more like the kind of thing that gets remembered because someone actually witnessed it and could not forget. After Awan's departure, Eve began keeping account, not of days, precisely. The Jubilee cycle framework of Jubilees suggests that time in the antediluvian period was tracked differently than our modern calendars would suggest. But a count of some kind, a marking of intervals. The Cave of Treasures describes her maintaining a practice of prayer at specific times oriented toward the east, not toward the sealed entrance of Eden above her, where the cherubim stood with their rotating sword, but toward the horizon where Awan had disappeared, as though prayer sent in a specific direction might arrive more reliably than prayer sent into
Lord,
the general
have
air.
mercy upon
Adam watched her do
us.
this and said nothing.
Christ,
He
have
understood.
mercy.
He had his own orientations, his own private geographies of loss mapped onto the landscape around their dwelling. The place where Abel had knelt, the path Cain had taken, the specific tree under which the brothers had last spoken before the field, and the act that ended everything. Every parent of exiled children learns to live in a landscape haunted by departures. Eve learned it first. She learned it in a world with no tradition of how such learning was supposed to go. No elders to consult, no community of other grieving mothers to sit with in the evenings and speak the names of the absent. She learned it alone, with only Adam beside her, in a silence so total that the east wind she kept asking about was probably the loudest sound their evenings contained. Her silence about Awan was her love for Awan. The Ethiopian tradition understood this. The
Lord,
Cain's
have
manuscripts
mercy
preserved it,
upon us.
and in preserving it, in
Christ,
keeping
have
the record of
mercy.
Eve's wordless vigil facing east, her question about the wind, her husband's quiet acknowledgement of distance. These texts gave us something that no genealogical list and no legal framework could provide. They gave us the feeling of the story, not just the architecture of who married whom and what law governed the union and what children resulted. The feeling, the weight, the specific gravity of a mother in the long middle years of an impossible life, sitting with her hands occupied and her mind traveling eastward toward a daughter whose face she could still perfectly reconstruct in memory but would never again touch. That is Eve's contribution to the account of Cain's life, not information, presence, and in the stillness that is gathering around you now, in the quiet that sleep is already beginning to build at the edges of your awareness.
Lord, have
Perhaps you can feel
mercy
something of what she
upon
felt.
us.
The particular peace
Christ,
that
have
arrives not when
mercy.
grief disappears, but when you stop fighting it. When you let it be what it is. When you sit with your hands, doing their quiet work, and allow the east wind to carry whatever it carries. Eve sat with that peace every evening. It was not the peace of resolution. It was the peace of endurance, which is, in many ways, the deeper and more sustaining of the two. And Awan, somewhere in there, was building something that her mother's prayers were quietly, invisibly held around. There comes a moment in every story of origins when the frame expands. When what seemed like a story about specific people, this man, this woman, this particular grief in this particular landscape, reveals itself to be something larger. A story about a category of people. A story about what happens when heaven and earth develop different ideas about how human life should unfold.
Lord,
A story about
have
the daughters of
mercy
men,
upon
a
us.
phrase that appears in
Christ,
Genesis 6
have
like a
mercy.
stone dropped into still water, generating ripples that the abbreviated text never fully traces. The second account of Cain's wife begins here, not with a name, as the first account does, not with a legal framework or a jubilee cycle, or the precise administrative vocabulary of the heavenly tables. It begins with a category, a designation, a way of speaking about women in the antediluvian world that the Ethiopian tradition, drawing from 1 Enoch, from Jubilees, and from the surrounding matrix of Giez's commentary, treats as carrying enormous theological significance. The daughters of men, in Genesis 6, this phrase appears in contrast to another phrase, the sons of God. The sons of God saw the daughters of men and found them beautiful, and they took wives from among them. Western theology has debated for centuries what these two categories mean. Angels
Lord,
and humans,
have mercy
Sethite
upon
men
us.
and Cainite women,
Christ,
divine
have
beings and mortal
mercy.
women. The debate has generated entire libraries of commentary without reaching consensus. But the Ethiopian tradition is less ambivalent. In the framework that 1 Enoch constructs, and that the broader GA's manuscript tradition elaborates, the daughters of men are a specific population. They are the female descendants of the early human generations, living in the expanding world east of Eden, before the Watchers descended, and before the flood reshaped everything. They are ordinary women in the most extraordinary circumstances imaginable, inhabiting a world still close enough to its origins that the memory of the garden was not yet entirely metaphorical, still breathing air that carried traces of a created order not yet fully corrupted, still living in bodies that aged more slowly than anything the post-Diluvian world would produce.
Lord, have mercy
They were
upon
beautiful in a way
us.
the text struggles to
Christ,
articulate.
have mercy.
Not merely physically, though 1 Enoch is specific about the physical beauty of the antediluvian women, specific enough that later interpreters found the specificity troubling. beautiful in the fuller sense that the Hebrew concept of beauty carries, radiant with vitality, luminous with the residual brightness of a creation still relatively close to its source. The daughters of men in the pre-flood world were, according to the Ethiopian framework, beings of a kind that no longer exists. Neither fully the luminous creatures that Adam and Eve had been in Eden, nor the shortened, diminished humans that the post-flood generations would become. Something in between, something transitional. And Cain's wife, in this second account, was one of them. Not Awan, not the sister from Jubilees. In this account, rooted in the genealogical traditions that surround
Lord,
one
have
Enoch
mercy
and
upon
find their
us.
fullest expression
Christ,
in the
have
Ethiopian
mercy.
Synaxarium commentary traditions. The woman Cain encountered in Nod was not a sibling he had brought with him from his parents' household. She was a daughter of the expanding human population east of Eden. A woman whose lineage traced back to Adam and Eve through a line the abbreviated Genesis narrative does not record, one of the unnamed daughters mentioned in Genesis 5's summary formula. Born to the early patriarchs in the years when lifespans stretched toward 1,000 and the human family was growing faster than the written record preserved, she had been in Nod before Cain arrived. This detail, present in specific Ge'ez commentary traditions and implied by the geographical logic of several Enoch passages, transforms the Nod encounter entirely. In the Jubilees account, Cain arrives in Nod with Awan already beside him, already his wife, already carrying,
Lord,
or
have
recently having
mercy
carried
upon
the child
us.
who would become the city's
Christ, have mercy.
namesake. But in this second framework, Nod is not empty when Cain reaches it. It already holds people. It already holds a woman who will look at the marked, exiled figure arriving from the west and make a choice that the text, in its compressed form, does not explain, but the Ethiopian tradition takes considerable care to illuminate. She chose him. That is the second account's central claim. Not that Cain found a wife waiting like furniture in the land of wandering. Not that biological necessity arranged their union the way it
باسم
arranged
أب
Awan's.
وولد ومنفس
She was a
قدس
woman with options,
أحد
relative
أملاك.
options, in a world still sparsely populated, but options nonetheless. Other men existed. Other futures were available to her. And she looked at Cain, at the mark, at the exile, at the weight he carried in his posture and his eyes. And she chose. Why? The Ethiopian commentary traditions
Lord,
offer several
have
answers,
mercy
and
upon
they are not
us.
mutually exclusive.
Christ, have
The first is
mercy.
practical. Cain arrived from the direction of Adam and Eve's dwelling, from the household closest to Eden, from the bloodline most directly connected to the original divine breath. Whatever the mark signified, and the Ethiopian tradition is rich with interpretation of the mark's nature, it also signaled origin. He came from somewhere significant. He carried in his body and his lineage a proximity to the source that the daughters of men in Nod, several generations removed from Adam, recognized and valued. The second answer is more intimate. He was broken in a way that called to her particular kind of strength. This reading, present in the Synaxarium commentary traditions and elaborated in several Ge'ez homiletic texts, suggests that the woman who became Cain's wife in this second account was herself a figure characterized by an unusual capacity for bearing the
Lord,
unbearable.
have mercy
Not a
upon
naive woman
us.
who did not understand what
Christ,
she was
have
choosing.
mercy.
A woman who looked clearly at what Cain was and what he had done and what his life would require of anyone beside him, and who found within herself a reservoir of endurance large enough to say yes anyway. There is a scene the G's homiletic tradition preserves that does not appear in any canonical text, but carries the texture of something very old. She was sitting near water, a stream or a spring, the kind of water source that determined where early settlements formed in the antediluvian landscape. When Cain appeared at the edge of her sight, he did not approach immediately. He stood at a distance, the way a man stands when he is uncertain whether his presence will be welcomed or fled from. He had grown accustomed, perhaps, to being fled from. The mark announced him before he could announce himself. It preceded every encounter, shaped every first impression,
Lord,
made
have
every
mercy
introduction
upon
and
us.
negotiation around
Christ,
the fact of what he
have
had done.
mercy.
She did not flee. She looked at him across the distance between them, and then she looked back at the water, and then she looked at him again. A long, unhurried assessment, the kind of looking that is not fear and not fascination, but something more deliberate, the careful evaluation of a woman deciding something important. Then she said, "You have come a long way." Not a question, an observation, the kind of statement that opens a door without pushing anyone through it. Cain said, "Yes," just that, one word. But he took a step forward when he said it, and she did not move away, and in that exchange, her observation, his confirmation, his step, her stillness, the entire second account of Cain's wife was set in motion. The choice was made in the space between those words, in the gap between the step and the stillness. In a world that had not yet
Lord,
developed the
have
vocabulary
mercy
for what was
upon
happening,
us.
two human beings
Christ, have mercy.
recognized each other across a stream and began the negotiation that would produce the first city. She was not named in this account, or rather, her name exists in fragments, in variant readings, in Guia's manuscript traditions that do not entirely agree with each other about what she was called. Some identify her with Luluwa, the third account's central figure. Others treat her as a distinct individual entirely. The Ethiopian tradition is comfortable with this ambiguity in a way that Western systematic theology struggles to be comfortable with the possibility that the same story can hold multiple truths simultaneously. That a woman at the founding of civilization might be remembered differently by different streams of a tradition, without any single stream possessing the complete account. What the tradition agrees on is the choice. She chose him deliberately,
Lord,
with
have
full
mercy
awareness of
upon
what
us.
the choice entailed. And in choosing
Christ,
him,
have
she
mercy.
became something the Jubilees account of Awan, with all its legal precision and heavenly record-keeping, does not quite capture. She became the first woman in the biblical narrative to choose a broken man and stay, not from ignorance of the brokenness, because of it, because she understood in the way that certain people understand certain things before they can articulate the understanding. that the broken ones are often closer to the truth than the whole ones. That the mark Cain carried was not only a sign of guilt, but a sign of having been in the presence of the divine long enough for the divine to leave an impression. She had never been that close to the source, and she wanted to know what it felt like to stand beside someone who had. Outside, the night has deepened around you. Whatever light remains in your room has softened to something barely.
Lord,
There,
have
your
mercy
breath is
upon
slower than it
us.
was when this story
Christ,
began,
have
slower and more
mercy.
even, settling into the rhythm that your body finds when the day finally releases its claim on you. The stream is still there in the old story. The water still moves. The woman still sits beside it, making her careful assessment of the marked man at the edge of her sight. And somewhere in the Ethiopian highlands, in a monastery where the Cains manuscripts are stored in cedar chests lined with embroidered cloth, a monk who has read this passage 100 times is reading it again tonight by candlelight, and the candle flame moves slightly in a draught from a window that does not quite close, and the light shifts across the ancient characters on the page, and the woman's unnamed name rests there in the text, waiting, still choosing. There are documents that exist outside of time. Not metaphorically outside of time, not in the loose
Lord,
poetic
have
sense
mercy
that we
upon
sometimes
us.
use when describing a piece of writing
Christ,
so
have
enduring
mercy.
that it feels permanent, literally. Outside of time, in the theological framework that produces them. Written before the events they describe, dictated before the laws they contain had yet been applied to a single human life, existing in the celestial archive with the completeness and finality of something that was never composed but simply always was. The way a mountain does not become a mountain but simply exists as one, indifferent to the question of its own origin. The Book of Jubilees presents itself as precisely this kind of document. Its opening verses establish the claim without apology. Moses has ascended Sinai. God speaks to him. And what God gives him, in addition to the stone tablets carrying the 10 Commandments, is a dictation. An angel identified as the angel of the presence speaks the contents of the heavenly tables into the human
Lord,
record,
have
translating
mercy
the
upon
celestial
us.
archive into language that
Christ,
Moses and his
have
descendants
mercy.
can carry, transmit, study, and apply. The Book of Jubilees is not, in its own self-understanding, a human composition. It is a transcript, a faithful reproduction of what was written above before it was needed below. Western scholarship has spent considerable energy debating when Jubilees was actually composed, most placing its origin in the 2nd century BC, during the period of Maccabean religious ferment when Jewish identity was under intense pressure from Hellenistic cultural dominance. This dating is probably accurate as a description of when the text reached its current written form. But it misses something the Ethiopian tradition has always understood instinctively. The dating of a text's composition and the dating of the traditions it preserves are entirely separate questions. Jubilees may have been written down in the 2nd
Lord,
century BC.
have mercy upon
The material
us.
it contains may be
Christ,
far
have
older.
mercy.
Oral traditions, priestly records, genealogical lists maintained across generations by scribal communities whose names we have mostly lost. The Ethiopian Church did not receive Jubilees as a 2nd century composition. It received it as scripture, as the dictated transcript of an angelic voice on a mountaintop, and it read it accordingly, with the same authority, the same assumption of divine origin, the same expectation of legal precision that it brought to Leviticus or Deuteronomy. This is the lens through which the marriage laws of Jubilees must be understood. They are not ancient Israel's attempt to retroactively legitimize the genealogical irregularities of its founding narratives. They are, within the Ethiopian framework, the heavenly table's own account of how God administered the expansion of the first human family,
Lord, have
including the
mercy
specific
upon
problem of
us.
Cain's wife, and
Christ,
the broader
have
question
mercy.
of how marriage worked in a world with only one family in it. And the administration is extraordinarily detailed. Jubilees divides antediluvian time into Jubilee cycles, periods of 49 years, each subdivided into 7 weeks of 7 years. Within this framework, the text tracks not just the major events of Genesis, but the precise timing of marriages, births, deaths, and legal transitions. The movement of the heavenly table's marriage law from celestial storage into active human application is one of the most carefully charted progressions in the entire text. Here is how that progression unfolds. In the first Jubilee cycle, covering roughly the period from Adam's creation to the early years of Cain and Abel's lives, no marriage law is yet in active operation on earth. Adam and Eve exist as a singular pair, their union the template rather
Lord,
than the subject
have
of
mercy
legislation.
upon us.
The heavenly tables
Christ,
hold the
have
marriage laws in
mercy.
reserve, waiting for the human family to generate the complexity that legislation requires. A law governing sibling marriage serves no purpose in a world with only one couple. It is written. It waits. The second Jubilee cycle, the period in which Jubilees places Cain's marriage to Awan, represents the first human generation. Cain, Abel, and their siblings are the inaugural cohort of born and raised human beings. The world is still essentially a single household. The marriage law is still held in reserve because the conditions requiring it have not yet been fully established. Cain takes Awan. The heavenly tables record it. No condemnation is issued because no prohibition has yet descended into operative human law. God is watching. He is watching with the specific attention of someone overseeing a transition, aware of where the process is heading,
Lord, have
aware of the
mercy
laws
upon
that will
us.
eventually need to be activated,
Christ, have
aware that the human
mercy.
family is currently in a stage of development that requires tolerance of arrangements that will later be prohibited. This is not moral indifference. It is developmental governance. The same principle that allows an infant to be carried before requiring it to walk. But the tolerance is not permanent. Jubilees is precise about when and how the marriage prohibitions begin to descend from the heavenly tables into active human law. The transition is gradual, not a single pronouncement, but a series of activations, each triggered by the human family reaching a new threshold of complexity. As the generations multiply as the population diversifies, as the mathematical necessity of sibling marriage gives way to the practical availability of cousin marriage, and then more distant kinship connections, the heavenly tables release their prohibitions
Lord,
in sequence.
have mercy upon
By the time
us.
of Noah, 10
Christ,
generations from
have
Adam,
mercy.
the full marriage law is in active operation. The prohibitions that Awan's marriage preceded are by then entirely in force. The legal world that Jubilees describes in the post-Diluvian period is substantially stricter than the legal world it describes in Cain's generation. Not because God changed his mind, because the human family had grown to the point where the laws written before creation could finally be applied in their complete form. This progression matters for understanding why Jubilees preserves Awan's story at all. A tradition interested only in sanitizing the genealogical record would have omitted her entirely, as the abbreviated Genesis narrative effectively did. A tradition interested only in condemning the early generations would have recorded her marriage as a violation, a sin, evidence of the moral decline that eventually
Lord,
necessitated
have
the flood.
mercy upon us.
Jubilees does
Christ,
neither. It
have
records her with
mercy.
precision and without judgment because its theological framework requires exactly that posture. Awan's marriage was legally valid at the time it occurred. The law that would eventually prohibit it was written in heaven, but not yet active on earth. There is nothing to condemn. There is only a record to maintain, and the maintenance of that record, the decision to preserve Awan's name, her date, her son's birth, in the specific Jubilee week that Jubilees identifies, is itself a theological statement. It says, every human life, even the ones Western tradition found too complicated to acknowledge, was known to heaven, was counted, was included in the celestial archive that God dictated to Moses. On the mountain, nobody fell through the gaps of divine attention. Not even the wife of the man with the mark. Now, consider what this means for the second and
Lord,
third accounts.
have mercy
If
upon
Jubilees
us.
establishes that the
Christ,
marriage laws
have
were administered in
mercy.
developmental stages, activated gradually as the human family required them, then the question of the woman Cain met in Nod in the second account becomes not merely a genealogical puzzle, but a legal one. Was she covered by the same developmental tolerance that governed Awan? Was her union with Cain, whether she was a distant relation or a member of a parallel human population or something the text does not quite categorize, also recorded in the heavenly tables? Was her choice, her assessment at the water's edge, her deliberate step toward the marked man arriving from the west, also entered into the celestial archive with the same precision that Jubilees uses for Awan? The Ethiopian tradition's answer is yes, not because it collapses the three accounts into a single story. It does not. It holds them as distinct traditions, each illuminating
Lord,
a different
have
facet
mercy
of the
upon
same
us.
foundational question.
Christ, have
Across all three
mercy.
accounts, across the Jubilees genealogy and the Enoch adjacent narrative and the Cave of Treasures intimacy, the heavenly tables function as the constant, the unchanging celestial backdrop against which every human choice is recorded, every human union acknowledged, every human life given its coordinate, in the divine accounting. She was in the records. Whichever woman stood beside Cain in the land of Nod, whether she was Awan who came with him, or the unnamed daughter of men who was already there, or Luluwa whose story the third account will tell in full, she was in the records. The angel of the presence had her name. The Jubilee cycle of her marriage was marked. The child she would bear was anticipated in the celestial archive before she had yet decided to remain beside the man who needed her. This is what the Book of Jubilees ultimately offers to the question
Lord,
of Cain's
have
wife.
mercy upon us.
Not just a name,
Christ, have mercy.
not just a developmental account of how marriage law moved from heaven to earth in graduated stages, calibrated to human readiness. It offers the assurance that the unacknowledged ones were never truly unacknowledged, that the women the Western tradition left unnamed were named above, that the stories the abbreviated Genesis narrative had no space for were nevertheless complete, fully recorded, fully preserved, fully honored in the document that God dictated before Moses had yet climbed the mountain, in the language that no empire ever fully conquered, in the manuscripts that survived in highland monasteries while everything around them changed. Let that settle into you now. Let it move through whatever tension remains in your body, like warm water through cold stone. The assurance that the unrecorded were recorded, that the
Lord,
unnamed were
have
named,
mercy upon
that
us.
the stories too complicated
Christ,
for the
have
simplified versions were
mercy.
kept in full elsewhere, waiting for the tradition willing to hold their complexity without flinching. You are resting in that assurance tonight. The Highland Monastery is cold at this hour. The monk who reads the Gi's text by candlelight has reached the passage about the heavenly tables, and he pauses, as he always pauses here, and he looks up from the manuscript at the dark window and the darker mountains beyond it, and he thinks about all the names written above that the earth below has forgotten. Then he returns to the page. The candle steadies. The archive continues. And somewhere in the eternal ledger that Jubilees claims to transcribe, a woman's name holds its place in the celestial column, designated for the third week of the second Jubilee. Immovable, permanent, quietly radiant with the specific dignity of having been known. There
Lord,
are
have
translation
mercy
decisions
upon
that are
us.
also theological
Christ,
decisions.
have
Every
mercy.
scholar who has spent significant time moving between ancient languages understands this. The moment you choose one word over another, the moment you select this Greek equivalent for that Hebrew concept, this Latin rendering for that Aramaic nuance, you are not merely performing a linguistic operation. You are making a claim about meaning. You are deciding, often irrevocably, what the receiving tradition will understand and what it will not, what will survive the crossing between languages, what will be left behind on the original shore, untranslatable, uncarried, eventually forgotten by everyone except the tradition that never abandoned the source. Gi's did not abandon the source. This is the central fact about the Ethiopian manuscript tradition that Western biblical scholarship took centuries to fully appreciate, and that, even now,
Lord,
has
have
not
mercy
penetrated
upon
popular
us.
understanding of the Bible
Christ,
to
have
anything like the degree
mercy.
it deserves. The Giez textual tradition did not receive its sacred texts through the layered filtration process that produced the Western Bible. It did not pass through the Greek Septuagint, and then the Latin Vulgate, and then the successive waves of vernacular translation that carried each step's interpretive choices further from the original material. It drew from sources, Semitic, Aramaic, early Hebrew, that in several cases predate the manuscript traditions underlying the Western canon. The divergences this produces are not minor. They are not the kind of textual variants that source criticism typically flags as insignificant. A different word order here, an alternate spelling there, a marginal gloss incorporated into the main text by a careless copyist. The divergences between Giez versions of Jubilees, 1 Enoch, and
Lord,
the Cave of
have
Treasures
mercy
and their
upon
nearest
us.
Western equivalents are substantive.
Christ, have
They
mercy.
affect names. They affect legal frameworks. They affect the presence or absence of entire passages. And nowhere are these divergences more significant than in the material surrounding the early chapters of Genesis. The chapters that contain the story of Cain's wife. Let us begin with the names. The Western textual tradition, meaning the Greek, Latin, and subsequent vernacular traditions, preserves almost no names for the women of the antediluvian period outside of Eve. The daughters of Adam and Eve are unnamed. The wives of the antediluvian patriarchs listed in Genesis 5 are unnamed. The women who appear in the genealogical record as mothers of the next generation are recorded only through their sons. She bore him this son, and then that son, and then she disappears from the text as thoroughly as if she had never existed as a named
Lord,
individual
have
at all.
mercy upon
The Giez
us.
tradition is different.
Christ, have
Multiple Ethiopian
mercy.
manuscripts, including versions of Jubilees, the Cave of Treasures, and related Giez, homiletic, and commentary traditions, preserve naming traditions for these women that simply do not appear in the Greek or Latin textual streams. These are not names invented by later scribes to fill genealogical gaps. Scholars at Hamburg's Hiob Ludolf Center for Ethiopian and Eritrean Studies have documented the consistency of these naming traditions across independent manuscript families. Manuscript families that could not have borrowed from each other because they developed in geographically separated monastic communities with limited contact. The same names appear in Tigray manuscripts and in manuscripts from the Lake Tana monasteries and in manuscripts from the Debre Damo tradition. Independent preservation of identical names is the strongest possible evidence
Lord,
that those names
have mercy
derive from
upon
a common
us.
ancient source
Christ,
rather
have
than from later
mercy.
invention. Awan appears in all three manuscript families. So does Azura. The name Jubilees gives to Seth's wife, Adam's daughter, who became the wife of the third son after Cain and Abel. So does Noam, the name given in certain Giez traditions to the daughter of Seth, who appears in the genealogical material surrounding the pre-flood period. And so does the name at the center of the third account, whose full story is still ahead of us tonight, Luluwa, the twin, whose name and whose origin the Guise tradition preserves with a specificity that no Western manuscript tradition approaches, but the divergences go deeper than names. The Guise version of the Jubilees marriage law passages contains a section that is either absent or severely truncated in every Western equivalent. This section, scholars call it the expanded marriage pericope.
Lord,
Though
have
the
mercy
designation
upon
is recent
us.
and the passage
Christ,
itself
have
is ancient,
mercy.
elaborates the heavenly table's marriage legislation with a specificity that the standard Western Jubilees text does not preserve. It describes not merely the prohibition against sibling marriage and its developmental activation, but the precise reasoning the angel of the presence offers Moses for why the earliest generation was exempt from that prohibition. The reasoning is theological, not merely biological. The Western tradition's implicit answer to why Cain could marry his sister is essentially mathematical. There was no one else. This is the answer of necessity, of logical inevitability, of a problem solving itself because no alternative existed. It is a sufficient answer in its way. But it is not a satisfying one. It does not tell us anything about God's posture toward the arrangement. It does not tell us whether heaven viewed the first
Lord,
human
have
marriages
mercy
with
upon
tolerance, with
us.
active approval, with
Christ,
something
have
resembling
mercy.
grief, or with something resembling recognition that the circumstances required. What the circumstances required. The expanded marriage pericope in the Guise Jubilees text tells us something different. It tells us that God looked at the situation of Adam's children with a specific quality of attention. The attention, the passage suggests, of a parent watching children navigate a circumstance that the parent knows will eventually resolve into something better. The Guise text uses a word here that scholars have found genuinely difficult to render into European languages. A Guise term that occupies the semantic space between forbearance and tenderness, between patient endurance and active, engaged compassion. God did not merely tolerate the first generation's marriages. He held them. He regarded them with something that the Guise tradition at least
Lord,
wants to
have
call
mercy
love.
upon
A
us.
specific, contextually
Christ, have
calibrated
mercy.
love that knew where the situation was heading and chose to accompany the people in it rather than withdraw until circumstances improved. This is a substantially different theological posture than the Western tradition's silence implies, and it has direct consequences for how we understand Cain's wife in all three accounts. If God held the first marriages with this quality of engaged tenderness, if the heavenly table's developmental administration of marriage law was accompanied not by divine indifference, but by divine accompaniment, then Awan's marriage to Cain was not merely legally exempt from condemnation. It was actively regarded, actively accompanied. The woman who walked east with the marked man was walking under a gaze that the Guise tradition insists was not turned away. The Cave of Treasures divergences are equally significant.
Lord, have
though they
mercy
operate
upon
differently.
us.
Where Jubilees
Christ,
diverges
have
from its Western
mercy.
equivalents, primarily in the elaboration of legal material, the Guise Cave of Treasures diverges most strikingly in its narrative texture. in the quality of psychological and emotional detail it brings to characters and scenes that the Western versions render more sparsely. The Cave of Treasures is attributed in the Ethiopian tradition to Ephraim the Syrian, a 4th century theological poet whose influence on Eastern Christian thought was enormous. But the Ge'ez version contains material that most scholars believe predates Ephraim, incorporated into his framework from older Semitic narrative traditions. The divergences in the Cain material are pronounced. The Western Cave of Treasures account of Cain's post-exile life is relatively brief. It records the building of the city, the naming of Enoch, the subsequent generations of Cain's line,
Lord,
down to
have
Lamech,
mercy upon
and the famous
us.
account of Lamech's
Christ,
killing of Cain.
have mercy.
Cain, the narrative of punishment multiplied 7-fold, giving way to punishment multiplied 77-fold. It is a genealogical record with dramatic highlights but limited interior access to the characters involved. The Ge'ez version lingers. It lingers with Cain in Nod before the city is built, in the disoriented period between his arrival in the land of wandering and the moment when purposeful construction begins. It lingers with the woman beside him during this period, describing her in terms that the Western Star text does not preserve. Her particular quality of steadiness, her capacity for practical action in circumstances that offered no established pattern to follow. There was no tradition of city building to draw on. There was no architectural knowledge, no accumulated wisdom about how to organize human habitation at a scale beyond the family dwelling.
Lord, have
They
mercy
were,
upon
in a literal
us.
sense, inventing
Christ, have
it.
mercy.
And the Ge'ez Cave of Treasures credits her with a specific contribution to that invention. The passage is brief, and the scholarly debate about its precise meaning continues. But the substance is clear. She identified the location. She chose the site of the first city. While Cain was still in the disoriented phase of his exile, still processing, still adjusting to the permanence of his displacement, she walked the landscape around them and assessed it with the careful eye of someone who understood, practically and intuitively, what a place needed in order to support sustained human habitation. Water access, defensible elevation, proximity to agricultural land, the features that every subsequent city in human history would require, she identified first. She brought Cain to the place and said, "Here." One word. The same economy of language the second account uses.
Lord,
for their first
have
exchange
mercy
at the
upon
stream.
us.
Here.
Christ,
designation
have
of a
mercy.
The act of pointing and naming that is, in the deepest sense, one of the most fundamentally human things a person can do. Taking undifferentiated landscape and saying, "This place, specifically, is where we will build what comes next." Cain looked at what she was pointing at. He walked the perimeter she had identified. He stood at the center of it and turned slowly, taking in the sight lines, the water proximity, the quality of the surrounding ground. Then he said what any man says when the person beside him has seen something he missed. Yes, the city began in that exchange, in her here and his yes, in the specific, practical intelligence of a woman who had assessed a landscape while her husband was still grieving his displacement, and who brought him to the place she had already chosen, because she understood that sometimes the person who needs to
Lord,
build something
have
first
mercy
needs
upon
someone
us.
to show them
Christ,
where.
have
The Gies
mercy.
manuscript preserves this. The Western text does not. This is what is at stake in the divergences between the Gies tradition and its Greek and Latin counterparts, not merely names and dates and legal elaborations, though those matter enormously. What is at stake is the interior life of the story, the psychological texture, the specific human contributions of the women, the abbreviated traditions left unnamed, and therefore effectively uncharacterized. The Gies manuscripts refused that erasure. They kept the here, they kept the yes. They kept the woman walking the landscape while her husband processed his grief, identifying the site of the first city with the quiet competence of someone who had already accepted the life she was living and was getting on with building it. No Greek manuscript gave her that moment. No Latin translation carried it westward.
Lord,
It
have
survived in the
mercy
highlands,
upon us.
in the cedar chests,
Christ, have
in the
mercy.
firelit rooms where monks copied it by hand in a language that no empire ever fully conquered, preserving with each careful stroke of the pen the interior life of a woman at the founding of human civilization. A woman whose name might be Awan, or might be something else entirely, but whose here and whose yes are recorded in Gies with the same permanence as anything in the text surrounding them. Let your breathing deepen now. Let the word here settle into you the way it settled into that landscape, with the finality of something chosen, something designated, something that will not be moved from the place it was assigned. You are here tonight, in this specific stillness, in this particular quiet. The day that tried to take you in 17 directions has released its claim, and you are here, resting in the one place that has always been available to you.
Lord, have
The
mercy
manuscripts are
upon
still in the
us.
highlands. The
Christ,
cedar chests are
have
still carved with
mercy.
the same patterns the craftsmen used generations ago. The monks still read by candlelight in rooms where the mountain cold comes through the walls, and the candle flames move in drafts from windows that do not quite close. And in those rooms, in that light, in that language, the women of the earliest human world are still named, still located, still credited with their here and their yes. Still building the first city, one careful word at a time. There are some origins so specific that their specificity feels like proof. Not proof in the forensic sense, not evidence that can be submitted to a committee of scholars and evaluated against established criteria and declared verified or false. Proof in the older sense, the sense that a detail carries when it is too precise to have been invented, too intimate to have been fabricated by a tradition seeking
Lord,
to fill a
have
gap,
mercy upon
too
us.
strange to have emerged
Christ,
from anything
have
except an
mercy.
extremely old memory of something that actually happened. The third account of Cain's wife carries this quality. Her name, in the Ethiopian tradition that preserves this account most fully, was Luluwa, and her origin is unlike anything in either of the two accounts that precede her in this telling. Unlike the legal precision of Awan's Jubilee-dated marriage, and unlike the unnamed daughter of men, who made her careful assessment at the edge of a stream. Luluwa's origin is a creation story within a creation story, a second Genesis nested inside the first. A detail so specific about the nature of her existence that it reframes not only the question of Cain's wife, but the entire account of human creation in Genesis 1 and 2. She was Adam's twin, not Eve's daughter, not a sibling born to Adam and Eve in the years after Eden. Adam's twin, born simultaneously
Lord,
with Adam
have
himself,
mercy upon
formed from the
us.
same divine act,
Christ, have
present at the
mercy.
beginning of the human story, in a way that Genesis compresses so severely that her existence disappears entirely from the Western text. Let that sit for a moment. The Ethiopian tradition, drawing from the Cave of Treasures and the surrounding matrix of Giez's commentary that elaborates the creation narrative with a specificity the Western canon does not preserve, describes the original act of human creation as producing not one being but two, Adam and Luluwa, male and female, yes, but not in the sequential manner that Genesis 2 describes, not the rib, not the building of woman from man's side after man has already existed alone and found no suitable companion among the animals. Simultaneously, together, two faces of the same divine intention, formed from the same red earth, animated by the same breath, emerging into the same first moment of human consciousness.
Lord,
side by
have
side.
mercy upon us.
The Giez tradition is careful
Christ,
about how
have
it distinguishes
mercy.
this account from the Genesis 2 creation of Eve. They are not the same event. Eve's creation from Adam's side, the tsela, the rib or side or aspect, depending on how the Hebrew is rendered, is a distinct act occurring after Adam's original creation and producing a distinct being who becomes his wife and the mother of his children. Luluwa's simultaneous creation with Adam is an earlier reality, a different layer of the same foundational story, preserved in the Ethiopian tradition because it addresses something the Genesis narrative leaves conspicuously unresolved. If Eve is Adam's wife, who was Luluwa? The Cave of Treasures answers this with a genealogical logic that is, once you follow it, remarkably consistent. Luluwa was Adam's twin. She could not, within the legal and moral framework that the Ethiopian tradition applies, even to
Lord,
the earliest
have
generation,
mercy upon
become
us.
Adam's wife.
Christ,
Not because the
have
prohibition
mercy.
against sibling marriage was yet fully active, but because the relationship between twins in the Giez theological tradition carries a specific sanctity that places it outside the category of marital union entirely. Twins, in this framework, are not merely siblings. They are something more precisely intertwined, beings whose shared origin creates a bond of a different order than the bond between sequentially born siblings. Luluwa and Adam were formed together. They could not be joined as husband and wife, but they could be separated. And in the separation, in the divergence of their paths after the creation moment, something was established that would eventually bring Luluwa to Cain. Here is how the Cave of Treasures traces that path. When God created Eve from Adam's side, Luluwa was present. She witnessed the second creation, or rather, she witnessed the making
Lord,
explicit
have mercy
of something
upon
that had been
us.
implicit
Christ,
in Adam
have
from the
mercy.
beginning. She watched Eve emerge, and she watched Adam recognize her with the recognition that the text records in his first words: "Bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh." She watched the establishment of the first marriage. She watched the beginning of the story that would produce Cain and Abel, and she understood her own position in that story. She was not Eve. She was not Adam's wife. She was the other original, the simultaneous creation, the twin face, present at the beginning, but not centered in it. The Ethiopian tradition describes her in this period, the pre-fall Eden period, as occupying a kind of sacred adjacency to the central human story. Present, witness, participant in the life of the garden, without being the subject of its founding narrative. Then the fall happened, and the fall changed everything about Luluwa's position, as it changed everything
Lord,
about
have
everyone's position.
mercy upon us.
Outside Eden,
Christ,
in the world
have
east of the sealed
mercy.
garden, the original configuration of the human family fractured and dispersed in ways that no pre-fall arrangement could have anticipated. Adam and Eve moved into their grief and their labor. Cain and Abel were born into a world already bearing the weight of the expulsion. The luminosity that Adam and Eve had carried from the garden, that fading brightness the cave of treasures tracks with such melancholy attention, was not present in their children to the same degree. Something had been lost in the generation of expulsion that the generation of birth could not fully recover. Luluwa carried something different because she had been formed simultaneously with Adam. Before the fall, in the original creative act, from the same earth and the same breath, she carried a quality of original brightness that the post-fall generations did not possess.
Lord, have mercy
She had not been
upon
born into the
us.
fallen world.
Christ,
She had
have
been created before it,
mercy.
and that distinction the cave of treasures suggests was visible, physically, spiritually, in some quality of her presence that the people around her could sense without necessarily understanding. She had a face that matched Adam's. This phrase, present in multiple independent Ge'ez manuscript traditions with remarkable consistency, is one of the most striking in the entire body of material surrounding Cain's wife. A face that matched Adam's, not identical in the way that a copy matches an original, matched in the way that two things formed simultaneously from the same source carry a recognizable correspondence. A shared structural quality, a common origin readable in the features of both. When Cain eventually encountered Luluwa, he recognized something, not consciously, not in the manner of formal recognition between people who have met
Lord,
before,
have
a
mercy
deeper
upon us.
recognition, the recognition
Christ,
of
have
proximity to the source.
mercy.
She carried in her face the same original brightness that he had grown up seeing in his father's face, but undimmed by the fall in the way his father's brightness had been dimmed, undiluted by the generational distance that separated Cain himself from the original creative moment. She was closer to the beginning than anyone Cain had ever encountered outside his own family, and she was not his sister. This is the third account's answer to the question the first account raises and the second account circumvents. Awan was his sister. The Jubilees account is explicit and unambiguous about this. The unnamed daughter of men in the second account was not his sister, but was several generations removed from the original pair, carrying diminished proximity to the source. Luluwa was neither. She was Adam's twin, which made her, by the genealogical
Lord,
logic
have
of the
mercy
Ethiopian
upon
tradition,
us.
something
Christ,
like Adam's
have
counterpart
mercy.
rather than his descendant. She stood in a different relationship to the founding human pair than any of Adam and Eve's children could stand. She was, in a sense, the original other. The Cave of Treasures describes their meeting with a narrative economy that condenses what must have been an extraordinary encounter into a handful of phrases. But phrases, so compression feels like deliberate art rather than textual truncation. Cain saw her. He recognized the face. He stopped moving. She looked at him with the specific quality of attention the G's tradition consistently attributes to her. An attention that is not innocent of what he was and what he had done, but that is also not defined by it. She saw the mark. She saw the exile. She saw the weight that Abel's blood had placed on him, and that no distance from the site of the killing had
Lord,
yet lightened,
have
and she
mercy
saw the
upon
face that carried
us.
traces of Adam's original
Christ,
brightness,
have mercy.
damaged and dimmed and marked, yes, but still recognizable as the face of someone whose father had been formed from divine hands in the first morning of the world. She said, "I knew you would come this way." Cain looked at her for a long moment. "Then, how did you know?" "Because it is the only direction," she said. "Everything else is behind you. This is the only way that remains open." He understood she was not speaking only about geography. The east was the only open direction, because every other direction led back to what had happened. Back to Abel's field, back to his parents' grief, back to the sealed garden whose entrance the cherubim guarded with their rotating sword. The east was the only available future, and she had been in the east, waiting, not consciously waiting for him specifically perhaps, but present in the only place the story had
Lord,
left available.
have mercy
Cain asked,
upon us.
"Why did you stay here?
Christ,
You could
have
gone
mercy.
anywhere." She looked at him steadily. "Where would I go? I was present before any of this began. I have been watching it unfold. The east seemed like the place where things would eventually arrive." He said nothing for a time. Then he said, "I am not easy to be near." "No," she agreed, "but you are not impossible." That exchange, the not easy, the not impossible, is the third account's emotional center, not the theological precision of the twin creation narrative, not the legal framework that governs their eventual union. The human recognition between two people carrying different kinds of original weight that the other's difficulty is not a disqualification. That not impossible is, under certain circumstances, a sufficient foundation. Luluwa's face matched Adam's. Cain's face carried Adam's diminished brightness. They were, in some deep structural
Lord,
sense,
have
reflections
mercy
of the
upon
same origin,
us.
not siblings, not
Christ,
strangers,
have
but
mercy.
something the Ethiopian tradition does not have a single clean category for. Original companions, beings whose proximity to the source made their recognition of each other immediate, and whose different relationships to the fall made their union a kind of meeting between the world, before the expulsion and the world after it. In Cain's son Enoch, those two worlds would produce a city. But before the city, there was a conversation beside a landmark. The Cave of Treasures does not name precisely. A rock formation, perhaps, or a distinctive tree, or one of those features of antediluvian landscape that existed before the flood reshaped everything. A place where a man who had come the only direction remaining to him met a woman who had always been in the east, watching the story arrive. She had a face that matched Adam's. He had a mark that announced
Lord,
his history
have
before he could
mercy
speak it.
upon us.
Between the face
Christ, have
and the mark,
mercy.
between the original brightness and the sign of consequence, a life was built in the land of wandering that would eventually produce the first architecture in human history. The first walls, the first gates, the first bounded human space that said, "Here is inside and there is outside, and the people inside are named and known and counted." Luluwa had been inside from the beginning. The city, when it came, was simply the world catching up to what she had always understood, that the inside is where the named ones live, and that naming is the first act of civilization, and that she had been named before civilization existed as a concept. Let the weight of her story settle over you now. Not as a burden, but as a covering. The way a heavy blanket settles over a body already moving towards sleep, pressing gently, evenly, with the specific gravity of something both ancient and warm.
Lord, have
Luluwa
mercy
carried that
upon
quality.
us.
The Cave of Treasure
Christ,
describes
have
her
mercy.
presence as something people felt before they understood it. A gravity, a warmth, an original brightness that had survived the fall intact because she had been formed before it. You are resting in something old tonight. Something that was written in a language older than the Bible you grew up reading, preserved in mountains that no empire fully conquered, copied by hands whose names are gone, but whose care remains in every character they pressed into the page. Luluwa's face is still in those characters, still matching Adam's, still watching the story arrive from the west, still saying, "This is the only direction remaining," still choosing to be present in the only place the open future could reach. Long after the source of the chill has passed, long after the winter that drove the temperature into the rock has given way to spring, to summer, to years
Lord,
of low
have
seasons
mercy
stacked
upon
against
us.
each other.
Christ,
still
have
carries it.
mercy.
You press your palm against it, and the cold comes into your hand not as memory, but as present fact. As something still happening inside the material, still radiating outward, still insisting on its own reality, regardless of what the air around it has become. The Cave of Treasures is such a place. Not literally, or not only literally, though the Ethiopian tradition does associate it with a specific geography, a specific hollow in the rock face of the mountain below Eden's sealed entrance, where Adam brought the sacred objects he carried out of the garden. The gold, the frankincense, the myrrh, the gifts that the Magi would eventually bring to Bethlehem were, in the Cave of Treasures narrative, first gathered by Adam in Eden and stored in this cave for the generations that would follow, a treasury of original holiness maintained in a world that was
Lord,
gradually
have
losing access
mercy
to its
upon
own
us.
sacred origins. But the cave is
Christ, have
also a literary
mercy.
place, a psychological one. In the Giz tradition, the Cave of Treasures functions as the emotional center of the antediluvian world, the site where the grief of the first family was held, processed, returned to. Adam and Eve lived near it. Seth and his descendants used it as a place of prayer. The bodies of the first patriarchs were eventually laid in it, awaiting the day when the promised deliverer would carry them to their final rest. It is a cave of accumulated human sorrow and accumulated human hope, existing simultaneously as a treasury and a tomb, a place of preservation and a place of waiting. And it is in this cave, according to a specific passage in the Giz Cave of Treasures tradition, that the most intimate account of Cain's inner life after Abel's death is preserved. The night the text describes is not immediately after the killing. It is years
Lord,
later,
have mercy
decades
upon
perhaps,
us.
in the expanded chronology
Christ,
of the
have
antediluvian
mercy.
period, where lifespans stretch toward centuries, and the years accumulated with a weight no modern calendar can quite capture. Cain is older. The city of Enoch exists, at least in its earliest form, its first walls and first dwellings taking shape from the labor of hands that had no architectural tradition to draw from. His son Enoch has children of his own. The first generation of the city's inhabitants is growing up inside the walls that Luluwa identified the site for and that Cain's hands built around them. And yet, the grief is still in him. This is what the Cave of Treasures understands about Cain that the abbreviated Genesis narrative cannot convey in the space it allocates to him. That the act in the field did not resolve into anything. It did not become history in the way that subsequent events become history, receding into the past,
Lord, have
losing
mercy
their
upon
immediate weight
us.
as newer experiences
Christ,
layer
have
over them.
mercy.
It remained present. It remained a living fact inside him, as present on the 100th anniversary of Abel's death as it had been on the morning after. The mark on his skin was the outward sign of an inward condition that no amount of building, no accumulation of children and grandchildren, no establishment of a city bearing his son's name had managed to heal. He went to the cave one night alone. The Giz text describes him making this journey without explanation to Luluwa, leaving their dwelling in the city of Enoch in the deep darkness before dawn, following a path that his feet apparently knew without requiring his conscious attention, moving westward through a landscape he had crossed once before in the opposite direction, carrying everything he owned and the full weight of what he had done. Westward, toward the place his parents still lived.
Lord,
He did not
have
go
mercy
all the way
upon
to Adam and
us.
Eve's dwelling. The
Christ,
text
have
is clear about
mercy.
this. He stopped at the cave, the hollow in the rock below the garden's sealed entrance, the place where his father had stored the sacred objects from Eden. He sat in the entrance of it. He did not go inside. He sat at the threshold, which is its own kind of theological position, neither in nor out, neither fully committed to entering the sacred space, nor willing to remain in the ordinary world outside it. He sat there and he wept. The Cave of Treasures is specific about the quality of this weeping. It was not the demonstrative grief of someone seeking to be witnessed or consoled. It was the private, thorough, long accumulated weeping of a man releasing something he had been holding for longer than he could precisely calculate. Something that had been building pressure behind a dam of purposeful activity and forward motion and the daily discipline
Lord,
of building
have
a life
mercy
in spite
upon
of everything.
us.
And that
Christ,
finally,
have
in the darkness before
mercy.
dawn beside the cave that held his father's sacred objects, found its outlet. He wept for Abel, not for himself, or not primarily. The Ge'ez text draws this distinction carefully. He wept for his brother, for the specific, irreplaceable fact of Abel. Not Abel as a theological concept, not Abel as the prototype of the innocent victim, not Abel as the sacrifice prefiguring later sacrificial systems, but Abel as a person, as the specific human being who had existed and then, because of Cain, had not. The brother whose face he could still reconstruct perfectly in memory, whose voice he could still hear in the particular registers of quiet and enthusiasm and concentration that had characterized Abel in life, whose absence was not an abstraction, but a specific, daily, locatable emptiness in the world. He wept for the conversation they would never have.
Lord, have mercy
detail,
upon us.
present in the Ge'ez
Christ,
tradition
have
and
mercy.
absent from every Western account of Cain, is perhaps the most psychologically precise thing the Cave of Treasures preserves about him. Not the grandeur of fratricide, not the theological weight of the first murder, not the cosmic significance of blood crying from the ground. The specific, small, devastating grief of a conversation that will never happen. The things he would have said to Abel if the field had ended differently. The things Abel might have said to him. The ordinary accumulation of a brotherly life that the act in the field made permanently impossible. He wept until the sky began to lighten. Then he heard footsteps behind him. He did not turn immediately. He recognized the sound before he needed to confirm it visually, the specific rhythm of a particular walk that he had learned to identify across years of listening in the dark. She had
Lord,
followed him.
have mercy upon
She had
us.
woken in the night to find him gone,
Christ,
and
have
she had
mercy.
understood, without needing to reason through it, where he had gone and what he needed. She sat beside him at the cave entrance. She did not speak. She did not ask what was wrong, or offer reassurance, or attempt to interrupt the grief with comfort. She simply sat, close enough that the warmth of her presence was physically perceptible, close enough that the occasional contact of sleeve against sleeve was available, but not pressing herself into the space his weeping occupied. She understood the geography of grief well enough to know when to fill space and when to leave it open. They sat together in the lightening dark. After a long time, Cain said, and the Ge'ez text preserves this in direct speech with the specificity of something remembered rather than composed. "I cannot put it down," she said. "I know. I have built a city," he said. "I have given it his nephew's name. I have not stopped
Lord,
working
have
since the day I
mercy
arrived in
upon
Nod.
us.
I thought if I
Christ,
built
have
enough,
mercy.
it would." He stopped. The sentence did not have an ending that language could provide. She said, "It does not work that way." "No," he said, "it does not." A long silence followed. The sky continued to lighten. The sealed entrance of the garden above them, was invisible in the darkness. But both of them knew it was there, the cherubim and the rotating sword, the permanent closure of the first home, the gate that would not open again in either of their lifetimes. Then Luluwa said something the Gyes text records with a careful precision that suggests it was considered the emotional center of the passage. She said, "He knew you." Cain looked at her. "Before the field," she said, "in all the time before. He knew you in the way that only a brother knows a brother, from the inside of the same life, from the same table, from the same parents. That knowing does not end.
Lord,
You carry it,
have
and
mercy
he,
upon
wherever he is
us.
in the keeping of God, he carries
Christ,
it too.
have
The field
mercy.
is not the whole of what you were to each other." Cain was silent for a very long time. Then he said quietly, "Do you believe that?" And she said, "I was formed before any of this began. I have seen more of the original intention than either of you could. Yes, I believe it." He wept again after that, but differently. Not the accumulated, pressurized weeping of decades of suppression. Something quieter. Something that moved through him like water, moving through an opening that has finally been cleared. Not violently, not destructively, but with the steady, cleansing motion of release. Luluwa sat beside him until it was done. The sun arrived while they were still at the cave entrance. It came from the east, from the direction of the city they had built, from the direction of Enoch and his children, and the accumulating human life of the first settlement.
Lord,
It
have
came from
mercy
behind them,
upon us.
which meant
Christ,
that the cave
have
entrance before which they
mercy.
sat was briefly illuminated in the early morning light. The hollow in the rock face suddenly visible, the gold and frankincense and myrrh inside it catching the first rays and returning them as a warm, amber glow. Cain looked at the light inside the cave. He had not seen it before, or not seen it clearly, having always approached in darkness or imagined it only as a place of storage, a container for objects rather than a space with its own quality of presence. The morning light changed that. The cave was glowing, not supernaturally, not miraculously, just with the ordinary miracle of stored objects reflecting the morning sun, the gold doing what gold does when light finds it, the ancient resins of frankincense and myrrh releasing something of their fragrance into the warming air. He breathed it in. The smell of Eden carried in those
Lord,
objects from
have
the original
mercy
garden
upon
into this
us.
hillside hollow.
Christ, have mercy.
Specific fragrance of a place he had never entered, but whose residue his father had transported across the distance of exile in 3 careful containers of gold and resin. He breathed it and felt, for the first time in longer than he could measure, something in him go quiet, not resolved, not healed. Quiet. The grief was still there. It would always be there. The Cave of Treasures does not offer Cain a false resolution, does not manufacture a peace that his actions had not earned, and that the reality of Abel's absence could not honestly support. But underneath the grief, accessible in the specific stillness of that morning at the cave entrance, was something older and steadier than the grief. Something that had been there before the field and would remain after the grief eventually softened into the background of his long, long life. Luluwa put her
Lord,
hand over
have
his.
mercy
They sat
upon
in the amber
us.
light from the cave until the morning
Christ,
had
have
fully arrived.
mercy.
Then, without speaking, they rose and turned east, toward the city, toward Enoch and his children, toward the accumulated human life that was growing inside the walls she had chosen and his hands had built. Behind them, the cave held its treasures in the warming air. The grief had been released into it, or some of it had, enough to breathe again. Enough to turn east and walk forward into the only direction the story had ever left open. Luluwa walked beside him. She had been present before any of it began. She would be present through all of it. That was her nature, not despite the darkness of the story she had chosen to inhabit, but within it. Fully present within it, carrying her original brightness into the shadowed corners of a life built in the land of wandering, illuminating not by removing the shadow but by refusing to leave it.
Lord,
The city
have
was
mercy
still
upon
standing when they
us.
arrived back at its gates.
Christ,
Enoch
have
opened the gate
mercy.
himself. He looked at his parents' faces and understood, with the specific perceptiveness of a child who has grown up watching two people carry more than they speak, that something had shifted in the night. He did not ask what. He simply stepped aside to let them through, and as they passed him, he put one hand briefly on his father's arm. The contact of a moment, quickly withdrawn. The gesture of a son who loves carefully because he has learned that careful love is the kind that does not press where pressing would damage. Cain looked at his son. In Enoch's face, he saw traces of Abel. Not dramatically, not in any single feature that would make the resemblance undeniable, but in the quality of attention, in the way Enoch held his head when he was listening, in the particular steadiness of his gaze. Something carried forward through the bloodline that the field had not
Lord,
extinguished.
have mercy upon us.
He walked through the gate
Christ,
into the city
have
that bore his
mercy.
son's name. Luluwa followed. The gate closed behind them. The city received them back into its ordinary morning life. The sounds of people beginning their day, the smell of cooking fires, the voices of grandchildren calling to each other across the space between dwellings, and the cave behind them held the fragrance of Eden in the warming air, and the grief that had been released into it rested there quietly, no longer a pressure but an offering. The first human sorrow laid beside the first human treasures. In the hollow below the sealed gate of the first home, in the rock that holds cold long after the winter has passed, it approaches them as problems requiring solutions, as gaps in the logical architecture of divine governance that must be packed before the structure can be declared sound. The question of Cain's wife has been treated this
Lord,
way for
have
centuries in the
mercy
Western
upon
tradition.
us.
A problem,
Christ,
an
have
irregularity,
mercy.
something that requires either explanation or avoidance. Either a satisfying biological account of how the marriage was technically permissible, or a determined looking away that hopes the reader will not notice the gap long enough to ask about it. The Ethiopian tradition approaches the question from the opposite direction entirely. It does not ask why God permitted the marriage, as though permission were a reluctant concession, a divine tolerance extended under duress to a situation that heaven found as uncomfortable as the Western interpreters did. It asks instead why God arranged the circumstances that made the marriage necessary. Why the first human family was constituted in such a way that the first generation of children had no option except to marry among themselves. Why the world was designed to begin this way, intimate, enclosed, a single household,
Lord, have
producing
mercy
the entire
upon
human
us.
population from which
Christ,
all
have
subsequent
mercy.
diversity would eventually emerge. The answer the Ethiopian tradition offers is not primarily biological or legal. It is theological. And it begins not with Cain's marriage, but with the nature of divine intention in the act of creation itself. The Cains manuscript tradition, drawing from Jubilees, from the Cave of Treasures, from the commentary material surrounding both, consistently presents the original act of human creation as a unified intention, not the creation of a species that would then randomly diversify, not the establishment of a biological template that subsequent generations would replicate with variation. A unified intention, a specific plan for the expansion of the human family from a single origin point through a series of carefully administered stages, each stage designed to produce exactly the kind of diversity that the divine
Lord,
imagination
have mercy
intended.
upon us.
Not, despite
Christ,
the closeness of
have
the first generation's
mercy.
marriages, but partially through it. This is a profound reframing the intimacy of the first generation. The fact that Cain and his siblings had only each other, that Awan had no one to turn to except her brother, that Luluwa's encounter with Cain was an encounter between the only original humans in the same landscape, was not an unfortunate limitation on divine creativity. It was the design, the concentrated origin, the necessary compression from which all subsequent human expansion would draw its coherence. Think about what this means practically. A human family that begins from a single pair and expands through the necessary intimacy of the first generation carries something in its earliest generations that later generations cannot possess in the same degree. A shared origin so recent and so concentrated that it functions as a kind of
Lord,
gravitational
have
center
mercy
for the
upon
expanding
us.
family.
Christ,
Every person
have
alive in
mercy.
Cain's generation was, by definition, a close relative of every other person alive in Cain's generation. The human family in that first century was not yet a collection of strangers with a theoretical common ancestor. It was a single extended household, geographically dispersed but biologically immediate, carrying the same original breath in every pair of lungs, the same red earth in every body. God designed that concentration deliberately, and the marriages that the concentration necessitated, marriages that later generations would be prohibited from entering, marriages that the heavenly tables held laws against precisely because those laws would be needed when the concentration had dispersed into genuine diversity, were not exemptions from the divine plan. They were expressions of it, the means by which the original unity of the human family
Lord,
was maintained
have
long
mercy
enough
upon
to
us.
establish a coherent foundation
Christ, have mercy.
before the dispersal began. Jubilees articulates this principle in terms of the heavenly table's developmental administration of marriage law, the staged activation of prohibitions, calibrated to the actual state of human diversity at each point in history. But the deeper theological principle underlying that legal framework is this: God does not give laws against what He has arranged to be necessary. He does not create circumstances and then condemn the people navigating those circumstances for the choices those circumstances require. This is the answer to why God did not forbid Cain's marriage. Not because the prohibition did not yet exist, though it did not yet exist in operative form, but because the prohibition was designed for a different stage of human development, and the application of a law designed for one stage of development to an earlier stage
Lord,
where
have
the
mercy
conditions
upon
requiring
us.
that law have not yet
Christ,
arrived,
have
is not
mercy.
justice. It is anachronism. And the God described in the Ethiopian tradition is not an anachronistic God. He meets the human family where it is, with the laws appropriate to where it is, and He moves with them as they develop, releasing the next layer of the celestial legal code precisely when the human family has grown into the complexity that layer was designed to govern. Cain's marriage, in whichever of the three accounts you hold, was not a failure of divine oversight. It was divine accompaniment of the human family through its earliest and most concentrated stage, the stage before dispersal. The stage before the diversity that would eventually make the prohibitions both meaningful and necessary. The stage when the entire human story fit inside a single extended household, moving through a landscape that was still, in its early antediluvian
Lord,
form,
have mercy
bearing
upon
traces
us.
of its original intention.
Christ, have
But
mercy.
there is another dimension to this question that the Ethiopian tradition raises, and it is perhaps the most searching of all. Why did God permit Cain, specifically Cain, the marked man, the exile, the first person in human history to take a human life, to have a wife at all? This question cuts deeper than the biological or legal problem. It is a question about divine mercy and its reach. About whether the mark that God placed on Cain was intended to protect him from human vengeance, or to protect him for something. Not merely from harm, but toward a future that the act in the field had not made impossible. The Ethiopian tradition's answer is clear, and it is expressed most fully in the Cave of Treasures' treatment of the mark itself. The mark was not punishment. Western interpreters have sometimes read it as such. The mark as divine brand, the sign of Cain as a stigma
Lord,
that
have
announced his
mercy
crime to
upon
anyone who
us.
encountered him.
Christ, have mercy.
And the Ethiopian tradition refuses it entirely. God placed the mark on Cain after Cain expressed fear. Genuine, embodied fear that without it anyone who found him would kill him. The mark was a response to that fear, a protective response. God looked at the man who had just committed the first murder in human history, and his response was not to add punishment to consequence, but to protect the life that consequence had not ended. That protection implied a future. You do not protect a life in which you have no investment. You do not place a divine mark of preservation on a person you intend to discard. The mark said, in the vocabulary of divine action that the Cave of Treasures reads with extraordinary attentiveness. This man continues, His life is not forfeit. What he did was real, and its consequences are real, and he will carry them, but he will carry them
Lord,
alive,
have mercy
protected,
upon us.
moving forward into
Christ,
a future
have
that heaven has not
mercy.
closed against him. And a future requires companions. The wife who appears in Nod, whether Awan who came with him, or the unnamed daughter of men who was already there, or Luluwa who had always been in the east watching the story arrive, was not an accident of geography. She was, in the Ethiopian theological framework, part of the same protective intention that produced the mark. God did not place a mark of preservation on Cain and then abandon him to a solitary existence in the land of wandering. The preservation extended to the possibility of a life, a real life, built life, a life with another person inside it, generating the next generation, constructing the first city, doing the patient, daily, unspectacular work of continuing. She was part of his continuation, whichever woman she was, whatever account holds her truest origin. She was the embodiment
Lord,
of the divine
have
that
mercy
said,
upon us.
"Not this one,
Christ,
not
have
this life."
mercy.
The mark protects him from external violence. The wife protects him from the internal dissolution that isolation and unaccompanied grief would eventually produce in any human being, no matter how strong. God did not forbid the marriage because God arranged for the wife. This is the Ethiopian tradition's deepest answer to the question. Not a legal argument, not a developmental account of staged prohibitions, not a biological necessity dressed in theological language. A statement about the nature of divine mercy, that it reaches further than human expectation, that it extends into the darkest corners of the human story, and finds people in them, and arranges for them to not be alone in those corners. Cain was in the darkest corner the human story had yet produced, and God put someone beside him, not to redeem him instantaneously, not to erase
Lord,
what the field
have
had
mercy
established,
upon
not to
us.
provide a tidy
Christ,
resolution
have
that the weight of
mercy.
Abel's absence did not deserve, but to accompany him, to ensure that the man carrying the first mark in human history would not carry it entirely alone, that there would be a hand beside his, a voice in his darkness, a face across the fire in the long evenings of a life built in the land of wandering. She stayed. In all three accounts, across the legal precision of Jubilees and the genealogical complexity of the Enoch tradition and the intimate psychology of the Cave of Treasures, the woman beside Cain is characterized above everything else by her staying. She does not appear and then disappear. She does not resolve his situation and move on to another story. She is present across the years, across the building of the city, across the bearing of children, and the accumulation of grandchildren, and the slow establishment of the first human civilization.
Lord,
east of
have
Eden.
mercy
She
upon
stayed
us.
because God arranged for
Christ,
someone
have
capable of
mercy.
staying. That is the theological answer to why God did not forbid the marriage. Because the marriage was not a problem requiring prohibition. It was a mercy requiring acknowledgement. A divine provision for the continuation of a life that the mark had preserved, and that the wife would accompany through all the territory that preservation and accompaniment together could cover. The Ethiopian manuscripts kept this answer when the Western tradition left it unnamed. And now, in the deep quiet of the night gathering around you, perhaps you can feel something of what it means. The assurance not merely that the unacknowledged ones were acknowledged above, though that assurance is real and it is worth holding, but the deeper assurance, the one that moves beneath the genealogical record and the legal framework and the manuscript tradition, and
Lord,
arrives
have
somewhere more
mercy
immediate,
upon
that
us.
the mercy reaches
Christ, have
here,
mercy.
into the dark corners, into the land of wandering, into the long middle years of lives that did not resolve as cleanly as anyone hoped they would, into the nights when the grief that has been suppressed by purposeful activity finally finds its outlet in the dark before dawn, at the entrance to a cave that glows amber in the morning light. The mercy reaches here. It has always reached here, and it arranged with the same quiet precision that it used to place a mark on a marked man and a woman in the East for him to find, for you to be here tonight, resting, breathing, held in the stillness of a story older than any tradition that tried to abbreviate it. You are not alone in whatever corner you are carrying. The mark does not mean abandonment. The wandering does not mean forfeiture. The woman in Nod was not an accident, and neither is the peace that is arriving now, settling over
Lord,
you like
have
morning
mercy
light
upon
into
us.
a cave that has been holding
Christ,
sacred
have
things
mercy.
in the dark, waiting for the warmth that makes them visible. Ret in that peace now. Let it be enough. There are moments when separate streams of water converge. They have traveled different distances. They have moved through different terrain, one through limestone highlands, one through volcanic rock, one through the deep red soil of an ancient riverbed. They carry different sediment, different temperature, different mineral traces from the ground they have passed through. And then they arrive at a confluence point, and for a moment before the merging is complete, you can actually see the distinct columns of water moving alongside each other. Not yet mixed, not yet indistinguishable, still carrying the separate signatures of their separate journeys. Then they become one river. The three accounts of Cain's wife are like those streams. We have traveled
Lord,
with each
have
of them
mercy
now.
upon us.
We have followed
Christ,
Awan through the
have
legal architecture
mercy.
of Jubilees. Her name recorded in the celestial Jubilee cycle. Her marriage documented without condemnation by an angel dictating to Moses on a mountain. Her departure eastward watched by a mother whose hands could hold her face but not hold her in place. We have sat with the unnamed daughter of men at the edge of her stream, the woman already present in Nod when Cain arrived, making her careful assessment across the water, choosing him with the deliberate intelligence of someone who understood precisely what the choice entailed. And we have walked with Luluwa through the Cave of Treasures narrative. The twin formed simultaneously with Adam, carrying original brightness undimmed by the fall. Present before the story began, and still present through the night, Cain wept at the cave entrance until the amber light of morning arrived, and something in him released.
Lord, have mercy upon us.
Three streams, three
Christ,
journeys,
have
three distinct
mercy.
signatures. Now hold them together, not to collapse them into a single authoritative account, erasing the differences that make each one valuable. The Ethiopian tradition does not ask that of us. It is one of the most distinctive features of the Ge'ez manuscript tradition that it is comfortable holding multiple versions of the same foundational story without requiring resolution into a single definitive form. The Western systematic tradition, shaped by centuries of canon formation, by the pressure to establish one text as authoritative and relegate others to the margins, has a deep discomfort with this kind of multiplicity. It reads divergence as error. It assumes that if two accounts differ, one must be right and the other wrong, and the task of scholarship is to determine which is which. The Ethiopian tradition reads divergence differently. It reads it as depth.
Lord,
as the
have
natural result
mercy
of a story
upon us.
So foundational,
Christ,
so
have
ancient,
mercy.
so thoroughly embedded in the spiritual imagination of multiple communities across multiple centuries that no single telling could contain everything worth preserving about it. The three accounts of Cain's wife are not competing claims about a single historical fact, each trying to displace the others. They are three angles of illumination on a reality too large for any one angle to fully capture. Awan's account illuminates the legal dimension. It answers the question that the systematic mind most urgently asks: was this permitted? Was it lawful? Did God sanction this marriage or merely tolerate it? And Jubilees answers with the full weight of its celestial legal authority: yes, it was permitted. Not as a reluctant exception, but as a stage-appropriate expression of divine governance, documented in the heavenly tables with the same precision used
Lord,
for every
have
other
mercy
significant
upon
moment in
us.
the administration
Christ,
of the
have
first
mercy.
human family. But legal permission does not tell us what the marriage felt like. It does not tell us about the choice, about the assessment at the water's edge, about the woman who looked at the marked, exiled man arriving from the West and decided, with full awareness of what she was deciding, that not impossible was a sufficient foundation. The unnamed daughter of men in the second account fills that dimension, the dimension of voluntary commitment, of deliberate choice, of the specific human courage required to remain beside someone whose history makes remaining costly. And yet, even the courage of that choice does not tell us what happened inside the marriage across the long decades of antediluvian life. It does not tell us about the night weeping at the cave entrance, about the hand placed over another hand in the lightening dark, about the specific quality of presence
Lord,
that a
have
person
mercy
unkept
upon
carries
us.
when they were formed
Christ,
before the fall,
have
and
mercy.
have therefore retained something of the original brightness that the fallen world has been gradually losing ever since. Luluwa's account fills that dimension, the dimension of intimate accompaniment, of the specific texture of a shared life, of what it meant to be beside Cain, not just at the beginning of the choice, but through all the accumulated years that the choice continued to require legal permission, voluntary choice, intimate accompaniment. These three dimensions together constitute something the three accounts only produce in combination, a complete picture of what the divine provision for Cain's continuation actually looked like when it was lived from the inside. And there is a fourth thing the three accounts produce together that none of them produces alone: a portrait of God's posture toward the human beings in the hardest circumstances. In Jubilees,
Lord,
that
have
posture is
mercy
administrative,
upon us.
careful,
Christ, have mercy.
calibrated to the actual developmental stage of the human family, releasing law in sequence rather than all at once, meeting the first generation where it was rather than where later generations would be. In the second account, it is enabling, arranging for someone to already be in the East when the exile arrived, ensuring that the only open direction led somewhere rather than nowhere. In the Cave of Treasures, it is accompanying, present, in the amber light of the cave, in the fragrance of Eden,
باسم أب وولد ومنفس قدس
in the
أحد
quieting that arrived
أملك.
in Cain after the accumulated grief had finally found its release, administrative, enabling, accompanying. These are not three separate divine postures. They are three facets of a single posture, the posture of a God who does not administer human life from a safe distance,
Lord,
who does not
have
know human
mercy upon
continuation
us.
and then withdraw to
Christ,
observe it from afar,
have mercy.
who does not merely accompany in the moments of dramatic crisis and absent himself from the ordinary middle. A God who is all three simultaneously, precise in governance, present in provision, intimate in accompaniment, in the smallest human moments as completely as in the cosmic ones. The three accounts held together are a portrait of that God. This is why the Ethiopian tradition preserved all three, not because it was uncertain which was historically accurate, and therefore kept them all pending resolution, but because it understood, with the wisdom of a church that had been reading these texts as scripture for 16 centuries, that the question of Cain's wife was never merely a genealogical puzzle. It was a theological question, a question about divine mercy and its reach, about human dignity and its persistence even in the darkest circumstances.
Lord, have mercy
about the
upon
specific ways
us.
that God provides
Christ,
for the
have
continuation of
mercy.
lives that the world has marked as forfeit. And that question required all three answers simultaneously. Sit with that for a moment. The woman, whose name was Awan, documented with celestial precision in the Jubilee records, she was the legal answer. The affirmation that heaven kept complete accounts when earth kept abbreviated ones. The unnamed daughter of men at the water's edge. She was the volitional answer, the affirmation that the provision was not merely arranged but chosen, that the mercy did not override human agency but worked through it. And Luluwa, carrying her original brightness eastward into the land of wandering. She was the intimate answer, the affirmation that what God placed beside Cain was not merely sufficient but luminous, not merely adequate to the circumstances, but carrying something from before the circumstances,
Lord,
something
have
originary
mercy
and warm
upon
and
us.
fundamentally brighter
Christ,
than the darkness it
have
entered.
mercy.
Three women, three answers, one question, and the question beneath the question. The one that each of these accounts is ultimately addressing, the one that the Ethiopian tradition preserved them to answer, is not really about Cain at all. It is about anyone who has ever found themselves in a place they did not plan to be, carrying a weight they did not anticipate carrying, wondering whether the mercy that seems to operate so visibly in other people's stories extends to the specific corner of the specific land of wandering in which they find themselves tonight. The three accounts say, yes, not theoretically, not in the abstract register of systematic theology, where divine mercy is affirmed as a doctrinal proposition and left to operate at the level of principle, specifically in the manner of names recorded in celestial ledgers.
Lord, have mercy upon
At the
us.
confluence of
Christ, have mercy.
And a man's arriving figure, in the manner of hands placed over hands in the dark before dawn, in the manner of amber light arriving in the cave entrance at precisely the moment the accumulated grief has been released, and the body is ready to receive something other than sorrow, specifically, intimately, with the full precision of a divine attention that misses nothing and forgets no one, and arranges for companionship in the places where isolation would otherwise be the only available reality. That is what the three accounts held together say. And now the night is deep around you. Your breath has settled into the slow, even rhythm that your body finds when the conscious mind begins to release its grip on the day's accumulated weight. Whatever you are carrying tonight, whatever the specific coordinates of your own land of wandering, whatever the particular mark that your history has placed on you, the assurance that these three old accounts hold together is available to you. The celestial ledger has your name. Someone is already positioned at the confluence point toward which your open direction leads. And there is a brightness available, even in the darkest corner of the story you are living, that predates the darkness and will outlast it. Original, undimmed, carrying in its warmth the fragrance of something much older than sorrow. Ret in that now. Let the three streams merge in you. Let the legal assurance and the volitional hope and the intimate accompaniment arrive together and become,
Lord,
in the
have
quiet of your
mercy
body
upon
moving towards
us.
sleep, the
Christ,
single river that
have
carries you
mercy.
forward through the night. There are legacies that do not announce themselves. They do not arrive with fanfare of recorded history, with dates and battles, and the names of kings carved into stone monuments designed to last precisely because the kings who commissioned them understood that human memory is short and selective and requires architectural assistance to function across centuries. They arrive quietly. They move through the world in the bodies and habits and unnamed dispositions of people who never appear in the official record, who leave no monuments, whose contribution to the human story is so thoroughly woven into the fabric of what came after them that it becomes invisible, mistaken for the background rather than recognized as a cause. The women beside Cain left this kind of legacy, not the legacy of Cain himself,
Lord,
which the
have
Genesis
mercy
narrative does
upon
record,
us.
briefly,
Christ,
and with the
have
compressed dramatic
mercy.
intensity of a tradition that knew the material was significant, even when it could not give it the space it deserved. The city, the line of Lamech, the first metal workers and musicians and cattle herders, Cain's descendants credited in Genesis 4 with the invention of the practical arts that human civilization would build upon. That legacy carries Cain's name. It is traceable, documented, attributable. The legacy of the women who stood beside him is different. It is the legacy of what survived in the character and capacity of the children they raised. In Enoch and his descendants, in the specific qualities of intelligence and endurance and practical vision that a child absorbs not from formal instruction, but from the daily, unspectacular presence of the person who is simply always there, who assesses landscapes with quiet competence.
Lord, have
Who sits
mercy
without
upon
speaking at
us.
cave entrances in the dark
Christ,
before
have
dawn.
mercy.
Who says not impossible with the steady conviction of someone who has already decided and does not need to be persuaded. These qualities do not appear in genealogical lists. They cannot be extracted from Jubilee cycle chronologies or celestial legal records or the names carved into the first city's walls. But they are present in the next generation, in Enoch, who grew up watching his mother identify the site of the city and his father build it, who opened the gate each morning with the perceptiveness of someone who had learned from both parents what careful attention to another person's interior life looks like. In Irad, Enoch's son, and Mehujael, and Methujael, and Lamech, the line that Genesis 4 traces with its compressed genealogical efficiency, each name a compression of an entire life, each life shaped in part by the women who are not
Lord,
named in the
have
record,
mercy
but whose
upon
presence
us.
shaped the shapers.
Christ, have mercy.
This is how the legacy moves, not through the official channel, but through the interior one. Not through the names that get recorded, but through the capacities that get transmitted. The specific, practical, emotionally intelligent way of being in the world that a child learns from a mother who has demonstrated it across every ordinary day of a shared life in the land of wandering. Awan carried something particular into that transmission. The woman who had walked eastward from her parents' household, who had left the grief of Adam and Eve's dwelling behind her and followed Cain into Nod, without being naive about what following him would require. She carried in her the specific courage of the chosen direction. Not the courage of the dramatic moment, not the courage of a single decisive action that history records and celebrates, the courage of the continued direction.
Lord,
the daily
have
recommitment
mercy
to the
upon
life ahead,
us.
rather than the life behind.
Christ, have
The
mercy.
quiet, repeated act of facing east when turning back was always technically available and never once chosen. Enoch grew up watching that. He grew up understanding, through the absorbed learning of a child, surrounded by a mother's consistent example, that the life ahead is the life you build rather than the life you inherit, that the continued direction requires active daily renewal rather than passive momentum, that the courage of the first step is less demanding than the courage of the 10,000th step, because the 10,000th step lacks the adrenaline of novelty and requires instead the deeper, slower fuel of conviction. The unnamed daughter of men, the woman who made her assessment at the water's edge, whose here designated the site of the first city, and whose yes set its construction in motion, She carried something different
Lord,
into the
have
transmission.
mercy upon
She carried
us.
the intelligence of placement,
Christ, have
the capacity to
mercy.
walk a landscape with full attention and identify within it the features that matter. The water access, the defensible elevation, the proximity to what sustains life, and the distance from what threatens it. This is not a metaphor, though it becomes one. It began as a literal, practical competence, the ability to look at undifferentiated terrain and identify within it the optimal site for human habitation. But the same cognitive quality that produces that practical competence produces, in its more abstract applications, the capacity to assess any situation, relational, emotional, spiritual, and identify within it the features that matter, the places where investment will be generative and the places where it will be wasted. Her descendants carried this, not because she taught it to them formally, but because they watched her exercise
Lord,
it,
have mercy
watched her
upon
attend to the
us.
world with that quality
Christ,
of
have
careful, unhurried
mercy.
assessment that does not rush to conclusion, but also does not avoid decision, that gathers what is actually present, rather than what expectation has prepared it to find, that can say here with the quiet conviction of someone who has genuinely looked. And Luluwa. What Luluwa carried into the transmission is the hardest to name, and perhaps the most significant. She carried original brightness into a lineage that needed it. Cain's line was marked from its beginning by what had happened in the field, not cursed in the sense of being condemned to failure, not spiritually forfeit, in the way that some interpretive traditions have read the line of Cain as inherently opposed to the line of Seth, but shadowed, carrying in its generational inheritance the specific heaviness of a founding act that no subsequent achievement could fully counterbalance.
Lord,
The city was
have
real.
mercy
The
upon
arts it
us.
produced were real.
Christ,
The
have
metalworking and
mercy.
music and cattle herding that Cain's descendants contributed to the human story were genuine gifts, genuine additions to the expanding repertoire of human civilization. But the shadow was real too. And what Luluwa brought into that lineage, what her simultaneous creation with Adam, her pre-fall formation, her original brightness undimmed by the expulsion, carried into the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who descended from her union with Cain, was a counterweight to the shadow, not an erasure of it, not a false resolution that pretended the field had not produced what it produced, a counterweight, a luminosity in the bloodline that held the shadow from becoming the whole of what the lineage was. Her descendants, at whatever degree of removal, in whatever dilution that the generational distance from the original brightness produced,
Lord, have
carried
mercy
something
upon
of
us.
that original quality,
Christ,
something
have
that the purely
mercy.
descended, purely fallen human generations did not possess in the same way, a residual luminosity, a trace of the pre-fall formation that Luluwa had been, and that she transmitted, imperfectly but genuinely, into the human story through the children she bore in the land of wandering. This is the deepest legacy the three women carried. Not merely the continuation of a lineage, not merely the provision of a wife for a marked man in a landscape called wandering, but the specific qualities legal courage, practical intelligence, original luminosity that they carried into the human story and that moved through the generations of Cain's descendants in ways that the abbreviated genealogical record cannot trace, but that the Ethiopian tradition insists were real. The world was built by people carrying things their names do not convey.
Lord,
Every
have
city
mercy
that has ever been
upon
constructed
us.
stands on
Christ,
the prior
have
assessment of someone
mercy.
who walked the landscape and said, "Here." Every family that has survived its most devastating moment carries the legacy of someone who chose not impossible when possible was not yet available. Every generation that has retained something of human dignity through circumstances designed to strip it away does so because somewhere in the lineage, someone was present who carried brightness from before the darkness and refused to let it fully extinguish. These are not small legacies. They are the load-bearing elements of the human story, the invisible architecture beneath the named achievements, the qualities without which the named achievements would not have been possible, which means that the women who carried them are not merely footnotes to the story of Cain and his city. They are structural. They are foundational. They
Lord,
are, in the
have
deepest sense
mercy
that word
upon
can hold,
us.
the reason the structure
Christ,
stands.
have
The Ethiopian
mercy.
Bible knew this. It kept their names when the abbreviated tradition discarded them. It recorded their qualities when the compressed genealogical record had space only for the names of the men their sons became. It preserved in the highland monasteries and the cedar chests and the fire-lit rooms where Gies characters were pressed into parchment by careful hands, the specific texture of what these women contributed. The here and the yes and the not impossible, and the hand placed over another hand in the dark before dawn, and the face that matched Adam's, and the quality of attention that made the next generation perceptive enough to feel what was happening in their parents without being asked. It preserved the interior architecture, and now, tonight, in the stillness that has gathered fully around you, in the quiet that your breath has built
Lord,
over the course
have
of this
mercy
long,
upon
careful
us.
journey through
Christ,
the
have
oldest answer to the
mercy.
oldest question. You carry something of that interior architecture too. You have held these three women's stories. You have let their legacies move through your attention the way they moved through their descendants. Not with the force of formal instruction, but with the quiet, absorbed transmission of presence, of having been near something luminous long enough for some of the light to transfer. The night is soft around you now. Your body has released most of what the day placed in it. Your breath moves slowly, evenly, with the unhurried rhythm of a body genuinely resting. The three women are still in the story. Awan facing east, with her mother's handprint still warm on her face. The unnamed daughter of men, standing at the water's edge with her assessment complete, and her direction chosen. Luluwa carrying her pre-fall brightness into the
Lord,
amber cave
have
morning
mercy
with her
upon
hand over
us.
Cain's, and the
Christ,
fragrance of Eden
have
in the warming
mercy.
air. They are all still there, in the record that the heavenly tables kept when the earth forgot, in the Gies characters that the monks pressed into parchment in rooms where the mountain cold came through the walls. In you now, having held their stories through the long descent into this quiet, you carry what they carried, not perfectly. Not without the shadow that every human life acquires simply by being lived in the world east of Eden, but genuinely, with the specific particular, irreplaceable brightness that your own life contains. The brightness that was placed in you before any of this began, that the difficult chapters have not extinguished us. That is present right now in the slow movement of your breath and the weight of your body settling fully into rest. It was always there. It will be there when you wake. There are goodbyes that happen only
Lord,
once.
have mercy
Not
upon
because the
us.
people involved will
Christ,
necessarily
have
never see each other
mercy.
again, though sometimes that too, but because the particular configuration of that moment, those specific people, in that specific light, carrying precisely what they are, each carrying at the instant before separation, exists only once. It will not be repeated. Even if the people meet again, they will meet. As people changed by the interval between, as people who have lived through whatever the separation contained, and the meeting will be a different meeting entirely. The goodbye happens once, in one light, with one specific gravity. The goodbye at the edge of Eden happened on a morning when the dew was still on the ground. The Ethiopian tradition, drawing from the Cave of Treasures narrative and the surrounding GA's commentary material that elaborates the departure of Adam and Eve's children from the household below the sealed garden, describes this
Lord,
farewell
have mercy
with the
upon
specificity
us.
of something witnessed
Christ,
rather
have
than
mercy.
composed. Not a single departure, but a series of them, each one carrying its own weight, each one representing a specific severing of the household's original configuration. But it is the farewell between Eve and Awan, the last morning before Awan turned east for the final time, that the tradition preserves with the greatest emotional precision. Eve was already awake when Awan rose. This detail matters. Eve had not been sleeping when her daughter came out of the dwelling into the pre-dawn air. She had been sitting in the place. She had developed the habit of sitting in the hours before light, facing east, the direction of Cain's exile, maintaining the practice of directional prayer that the Cave of Treasures records as her particular discipline in the years following her son's departure. She was already there, already oriented toward
Lord,
the horizon
have
that was
mercy
about to
upon
receive
us.
her daughter.
Christ,
Alarm
have
stopped when she saw her
mercy.
mother. She had rehearsed this departure. She had planned its timing and its logistics with the careful practicality that characterized her. The assessment of what to carry and what to leave behind, the calculation of the route, the preparation for the terrain between her parents' dwelling and the land where Cain had gone. She had prepared for many versions of this morning. She had not prepared for her mother, already sitting in the pre-dawn dark, facing the direction she was about to walk, as though Eve had always known the precise morning this would happen and had been maintaining her vigil in preparation for it. Neither of them spoke immediately. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who have said, most of what can be said, and are now in the territory that exists beyond the sayable, the territory that only
Lord,
presence can
have
occupy,
mercy upon
that words
us.
approach, but cannot fully
Christ,
enter.
have mercy.
Eve looked at her daughter in the darkness, and Awan looked at her mother, and between their gazes was everything that the text cannot hold and the heart cannot release. Then Eve said, "Come here." Not a question, not a request that could be declined. An invitation so ancient and so thoroughly established in the grammar of their relationship that Awan moved toward it immediately, without deliberation, crossing the distance between them and lowering herself to sit beside her mother in the way she had sat beside her 1,000 mornings before this one. Eve took her daughter's hands. She held them with the specific grip of someone memorizing, pressing the particular architecture of Awan's fingers into her palms, feeling the familiar weight and warmth, the texture of hands that had grown from infant softness into the capable strength of a young woman.
Lord,
who had
have
spent her
mercy
life
upon
doing the
us.
practical work that the world east
Christ,
of
have
Eden required.
mercy.
She had held these hands when they were too small to hold anything. She had watched them learn to grip and reach and build and carry. She held them now with the knowledge that after this morning, the holding would exist only in memory. "You do not have to go," Eve said. It was not a serious objection. They both knew it was not a serious objection. It was the thing a mother says in the last available moment before a departure she has already accepted, the verbal equivalent of pressing her palms and passing against her daughter's hands, not to prevent the departure, but to establish that the departure is happening in the full presence of maternal love rather than its absence, that she is not letting go from indifference, that the release, when it comes from a love large enough to release, rather than a love too small to hold. Awan said, "I know," then, but he is there
Lord,
alone.
have
Eve said
mercy
nothing
upon
for a moment.
us.
The east was
Christ,
still dark,
have
the horizon holding
mercy.
its darkness with the particular stubbornness of pre-dawn that seems to resist the light longer than any other hour. Then she said, "He is not easy." "No," Awan said, "but he is my brother." "Yes," Eve said quietly, "he is." Another silence, the kind that holds more meaning than any sentence either of them could construct. Eve's hands still around Awan's hands, the warmth moving between them, the darkness still holding above the eastern horizon. Then Eve said something the Ge'ez text preserves with the careful specificity of a phrase understood to be the center of the entire passage. She said, "You do not need me where you are going. You have what I would give you. You have carried it since before you could walk. Everything I know that is worth knowing, you already know." Awan looked at her mother. "I will think of you every morning," she said, facing east.
Lord,
Eve smiled.
have mercy
The
upon
Cave of Treasures
us.
describes the smile
Christ,
with a single
have
Ge'ez word that
mercy.
occupies the territory between sorrow and warmth simultaneously. A smile that does not deny the grief but refuses to be defined by it, that chooses warmth as the dominant register even in the moment most saturated with loss. "I will be here every morning," Eve said, facing east. "You will not be able to see me, but I will be here." Awan stood. She stood slowly, not rushing the transition from sitting to standing. allowing the last moment of that particular proximity to be fully inhabited before she moved into the next configuration of her life. She looked at her mother sitting in the pre-dawn dark, this woman who had been present at the beginning of everything, who had carried the grief of the garden and the field and the exile with the particular endurance of someone for whom there was no alternative to endurance, who sat here every morning facing east because the direction of loss
Lord,
is also
have mercy
the direction
upon
of the people
us.
you love.
Christ, have
"I love you,"
mercy.
Eve said. "I know, my daughter, I know." Then Awan turned east. She did not look back. This was not coldness. It was the specific mercy that people who love each other sometimes extend in the moment of departure. The choice not to look back, because looking back makes departure into a prolonged series of smaller departures, each one reopening the wound that the previous glance had barely closed. She chose one clean turning, one clear direction, east, into the darkness that was beginning, at its very edge, to hold the first faint suggestion of the light that was coming. Eve watched her go. She watched until the darkness absorbed her daughter's figure entirely, until the shape that had been Awan, moving east through the pre-dawn landscape with her bundle and her practical stride and the life she had chosen, carried in every line of her posture,
Lord,
became
have
simply
mercy
darkness
upon
again,
us.
indistinguishable
Christ,
from the
have
landscape it had entered.
mercy.
Then Eve was alone in the pre-dawn quiet. She sat with it. She did not weep immediately. The weeping came later, in the full privacy of a grief that she shared with no one, that she processed in the slow, wordless interior way that had become her primary mode of emotional life since the garden. She sat with the space where Awan had been sitting, the warmth that her daughter's body had left in the air beside her, already dissipating, already becoming the ambient cold of the pre-dawn world, the particular warmth already belonging to memory rather than to the present moment. She faced east. She did what she did every morning. She directed whatever prayer she had toward the horizon that had received her son and was now receiving her daughter, toward the darkness that held the people she loved most, toward the direction that was simultaneously the
Lord,
direction of loss
have
and the
mercy
direction of
upon
continuation.
us.
Because
Christ,
every
have
departure east
mercy.
was also a going forward, a survival, a refusal of the alternative to continuation. She prayed without words. She had long since exhausted the words. What remained was the direction and the attention and the love that sent itself out into the dark landscape without requiring a particular form in order to travel. The sky began to lighten, slowly, in the specific gradual way of a dawn that has no intention of being rushed. The darkness at the eastern horizon warming almost imperceptibly from black to the deepest blue, from deep blue to something that is not yet color, but is the memory of color, the anticipation of it, the form that light takes in the moment before it arrives as itself. Eve watched it come. She had watched it come every morning since the garden. This specific progression of the eastern sky from dark through blue,
Lord,
through the
have
first hesitant
mercy
warmth
upon
of
us.
color that preceded the
Christ,
sun's actual
have
appearance.
mercy.
She had watched it in grief and in the exhausted peace that sometimes follows grief and in the middle distances of years that are neither crisis nor resolution, but simply the accumulated territory of a long life being lived honestly. She watched it come this morning, as she always watched it, with full attention, with the specific quality of presence that is both all she had to offer and more than most people ever managed to bring to the ordinary miracles that happen daily in the eastern sky. And then the sun arrived. It came from the direction Awan had walked, from the direction Cain had walked before her, from the direction that the sealed entrance of the garden faced, where the cherubim stood with their rotating sword, where the treasure cave held its gold and fragrance in the dark below the sealed gate, where the entire compressed geography
Lord,
of everything
have
that had
mercy
happened before
upon
this morning
us.
existed
Christ,
simultaneously
have
in the
mercy.
landscape. The sun came from the east. It illuminated Eve's face as she sat facing it, this face that had been the first human face to hold an expression of wonder, the first to hold grief, the first to hold the specific complex configuration of love and loss and endurance that the East required of her every morning. The light arrived on her face like a hand laid gently against it, like the hands of a daughter memorized, like the touch of something that had always been coming and had always known where she would be sitting when it arrived. She closed her eyes. She let the warmth of it move through her, through the cold she had absorbed from the pre-dawn stone, through the hollowness left by Awan's departure, through the long accumulated grief that was also, and always simultaneously, the long accumulated love. The warmth moved through all of it.
Lord,
without
have
requiring
mercy
any of it to
upon
resolve,
us. Christ,
without
have
asking the grief to become
mercy.
something else before the warmth could reach it. It simply came, warm, present. From the east, Eve sat in it, and she breathed, and somewhere in the landscape ahead of her, in the direction the sun had come from, her daughter was walking toward the man who needed her and the life she had chosen, carrying everything her mother had given her without knowing she was carrying it, moving through the same light that was arriving now on her mother's face, alive in it, warm in it, already building the life that the warmth made possible. She fell to her knees, not from grief, not from the weight of loss, though the weight was real, and she would carry it through every remaining morning of her long, long life. She fell to her knees from something else entirely, from the overwhelming, undeniable, morning bright reality of it, of the love, of the continuation, of the sun arriving from the direction the people she loved had walked, as though their departure had opened a channel in the eastern sky, through which the light could now pour more completely than it had before. She wept, not from grief, but from wonder, from the wonder of a love so large it could release what it loved most and still be full, from the wonder of a morning so ordinary and so extraordinary simultaneously, dew on the ground, sun arriving from the east, a mother on her knees in the light her daughter had walked toward, from the wonder, simply and completely, of being here, of being the one who sat facing east every morning and watched the light come from the direction of everyone she loved. The dew was still on the ground. The cave above her held its treasures in the warming air. The cherubim stood at their post. The sealed gate did not open, and the sun continued rising, as it had every morning since the fourth day of the world, unhurried, undeterred, arriving from the east with the absolute certainty of something that has never once failed to come. Tonight you heard what the Ethiopian Bible preserved. 3 ancient accounts of a woman the Western tradition left unnamed. Awan, who walked east with full knowledge of what eastward meant. The daughter of men, who made her assessment at the water's edge and chose with open eyes. Luluwa, who carried original brightness into the darkest corner of the first human story and refused to let it fully extinguish. 3 streams converging, 3 angles of illumination on a reality too vast for any single telling to contain. You have traveled a long distance tonight. Through the Jubilee cycles of the heavenly tables, through the amber light of a cave holding Eden's fragrance in the warming air, through a pre-dawn farewell on ground, still wet with dew, a mother's hands memorizing her daughter's hands. The sun, arriving from the east as though the departure had opened a channel in the sky for the light to move through. You do not need to hold all of it consciously. It has already moved through you, the way light moves through a room, not by being grasped, but by being present, touching every surface, leaving the space warmer than it found it. The names are in you now. The legal assurance and the volitional courage and the original brightness. All 3 woven into the quiet that your breath has built over this long, unhurried telling, not perfectly, not without the shadow that every human life carries simply by being lived east of Eden, but faithfully, one step at a time, one morning at a time, one eastward turning at a time. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May his face shine upon you, and may you rest tonight in his perfect peace. This is Pastor Michael. Sleep well, and may the angels of heaven guard your rest. Amen.